The forest was blazing in the night, engulfed in the flames of a fire. Someone was surprised to note how the forest was burning. A blond man with an eye patch wondered if at least one kobold would survive, while a bald man nearby, turning to the leader, suggested they retreat, because the magician turned out to be stronger than they thought. The leader insulted his henchmen, calling them suckers and cowards, after which he stated that the magician had not yet restored his magical power if the fire was so strong. Hearing a noise behind him, the leader turned around and was shocked by what he saw. The leader and his henchmen were hiding and looking towards the guy who came out of the burning forest, and was carrying something in his hands. The magician bared his teeth and was indignant at the heaviness and disgust of the severed head that he carried in his hands. A blue-eyed, dark-haired guy, stained with blood, carried the severed head of a monster in his hands, leaving a bloody trail behind him. The magician stopped when he saw that a group of bandits stood in his way. The one-eyed and bald man grabbed their blades and blocked the magician's path. Taking out a dagger and pointing it towards the guy, the leader of the group said that the magician should have just stopped quietly. The leader ordered the guy to throw his head on the ground and then he would save his life, to which the magician only laughed. Shrugging his shoulders and smiling, the magician agreed to do as the leader of the group wanted. Throwing his head to the ground, the magician immediately began to cast a spell, accumulating energy in his hand. The gang leader turned towards the bushes and called out to the hidden silhouette. A crossbowman appeared from behind the bushes and fired a bolt straight at the magician. The crossbow bolt was aimed at the guy's back, but the magician managed to notice a flying projectile behind him. Using magic, the guy redirected the crossbow bolt, aiming it straight at the bald henchman's leg. Shocked by what he saw, the one-eyed man froze in place, after which the leader ordered him to attack the magician. The blond henchman and the leader screamed and attacked the magician, smeared in the blood of the monster. Jumping back, the guy pushed away his opponents with a spell. The leader and henchman only screamed powerlessly. Clasping his hands, the magician cast a spell on his one-eyed henchman, piercing him with cold. The leader was angry and shocked that the magician used ice magic to freeze the one-eyed man. The leader looked at his frozen henchman in surprise, after which the latter began to fall. The frozen henchman rushed next to the magician, after which he fell to the ground, splitting in half. The frightened leader, surprised that the guy was not a fire mage, realized that the fire in the forest flared up due to explosives, but the mage interrupted his thoughts by noticing that there were two more bandits in the bushes. Suddenly, a blazing flame appeared from the magician's hand, refuting the leader's thoughts. Fireballs hover around the magician, and it seems that even his eyes are burning with fire. The guy directs a fireball towards the bushes without even looking in their direction. One of the fireballs remained next to the magician, while the rest rained down in hail towards the enemies. The fiery rain covered the bandits hiding in the bushes. They tried to save them, shouting for help, but the fire overtook them. The bushes behind the magician were on fire. One of the bandits backed away from the guy in horror. The gang leader angrily looked at the bodies of his henchmen, shrouded in flames. The bald bandit shouted in fear that the guy should not come near him while sitting on the ground. Placing his hand on the bandit's head, the magician burned his skull with fire, rays of light shining from his eyes and mouth. Falling to his knees, the leader of the bandits watched as the magician removed his hand from the body of his comrade, which had crumbled into ashes. Looking at the magician, the man began to wonder what the guy was doing was possible. Trembling with fear, the bandit asked the magician if he had the magic of fire and ice. Drawing his sword, the guy mocks the bandit's question, preparing to execute the surrendered enemy. The magician swung his blade, answering that he was a damn outsider, and then killed the leader of the bandits. The guy threw the severed head onto the bar counter, splashing blood. A gray-haired bartender stood behind the bar, looking in surprise at the head of the monster that lay on his counter. The tavern's visitors whispered while looking at the guy who brought the head. The bartender, who did not expect to see the trophy, just sighed. The bartender said he was really surprised, extending his hand closer to the severed head on the blood-stained counter. The man looked at the guy and thanked him, adding that he did not expect that the magician would actually kill the kobold. The guy threw a stern look at the bartender, after which he thrust his blade into the counter with such force that splinters flew off it. Seeing the sword stuck in his stance, the old man recognized the blade, realizing that the guy was facing the vigilance. The magician's eyes shone blood red, reflected in the blade, and he confirmed that he buried them because they behaved like fools, after which he asked if there were those in the bar who should also be buried. The concerned bartender, bowing his head, asked the guy not to worry, saying that he had nothing to worry about. The bartender called the vigilantes bastards, saying that they do nothing except gorge themselves on meat and drink alcohol, after which one of the guests added that there is no difference between them and the robbers. The other guests were glad that the magician had killed the vigilants, but the guy only sighed indifferently. Amid heated debate among the tavern regulars, a task interface appeared in front of the magician, informing him that the additional task to kill the kobold leader had been completed. The guy, thinking that he had not yet received compensation, asked the bartender if he had forgotten the cost of the request. The old man agreed, saying that the magician was provided with free food and shelter for the rest of his life. When the old man asked if anything else was needed, the guy asked to prepare hot water for the bath right now. The bartender said that he would fulfill the request, looking after the guy as he climbed up the stairs. The old man called out to the magician and asked what his name was, which made the guy stop. Confidently turning around, the guy looked at the bartender and said that his name was Ian Hope. A game called Aquilonia was illegally downloaded from one community. A game with semi-open worlds in the style of dark fantasy, full of intrigue and conspiracies. The main character became Ian Hope, a character in the game Aquilonia whom he leveled up before becoming one. Jan was a mixed-type wizard. According to him, initially in Aquilonia it was possible to develop only one branch of power, because this would help cope with difficulties in the middle of the game. But Jan did not follow these methods of leveling up and developed the character based on needs, leveling up stamina or sword skills if necessary, because magicians hunt alone. But because of this approach to leveling up, he became an outsider, and realizing that he had screwed up, the main character decided to delete the character, but saw text on the screen. The screen flickered with strange pop-up messages that someone was watching and wanted to destroy the world. Coming to his senses in the skin of his own character, the hero was surrounded by 4 armed men in the middle of a swamp. Jan found himself in the middle of a location called the training zone, which was overflowing with enemies and monsters. The confused hero wondered how he got to such a place and why, but his thoughts were interrupted by a blow from a blade. Blocking the blow with difficulty, Ian collected his thoughts, realizing that if he thought about it, he would die. Ian's eyes glowed blue, his face turned into a grin, and his blade was stained with the blood of the enemy. Jan spent 6 months in endless battles with monsters and enemies, managing to adapt to this dark world. Jan, sitting in the bathroom, reflects on the fact that a year has already passed while his blade is next to him. Instantly, Jan jumps up and grabs the blade, sensing movement next to him. Jan's blade stops a few centimeters from the throat of a girl holding a bucket in her hands. Screaming in horror, the girl said that she had come to add hot water, spilling water from the bucket with shaking hands. Jan hid the blade and apologized to the girl, explaining that he thought that they were going to attack him. Having relaxed, Ian leaned back on the side of the bath, while the girl was about to pour the hot water from the bucket. The girl asked Ian to tell her if the water got too hot. Jan noticed how the girl stared at his abs, after which he told her to remove the vulgar thoughts, which embarrassed the girl. The maid looked away and continued pouring water, while Jan thought about the fact that he managed to survive in the training zone only thanks to the abilities of his character, and that without them he would be dead. Despite the fact that the world map had expanded and the enemies had become stronger, Ian Hope was still an outsider. Many villages appeared that the hero had never heard of before, and although there were no problems with the oncoming villagers due to the difference in strength, he could not leave everything to chance. He may simply die due to subsequent events, so it would be nice if he found something useful from the kobolds, because Ian needs to become stronger. Frustrated, Ian comes to the conclusion that he will still have to ask the villagers to help him with his search. One of the villagers asks if they really can take things from the kobold village, to which the second replies that Yang said to give him only what seems valuable. 2 village boys are fighting for the find. One of them says that he was the first to see it. Looking towards the destroyed village, Yang wondered if the villagers would do as he ordered them. The villager, sitting next to the body of the headless monster, told Yan that, as he ordered, he removed the armor from the body. On the kobold's body was a ruby-red stone, deeply embedded in its chest. Yan immediately took the sword out of its sheath, holding it with a reverse grip. Plunging his sword under the stone in the monster's chest, he cut it out with a deft movement. The bartender asks Ian if this is a cursed stone, and he confirms the old man's guesses. Holding a stone in his hands with drops of blood flowing down, Yang said that the stone was filled to the brim with dirty magical energy. The old man asks Ian if he thinks that the leader of the kobolds used dark magic, to which the hero replied that the stone was enchanted by the one who inserted it, wondering what happens to the one who is possessed by the stone. One of the villagers calls out to a kneeling man named Johnson holding a stone in his hand, asking if he was looking on the other side. The villager asked what kind of stone it was, praising its beauty and asking where he found it. Johnson replied that right here. With an evil smile, Johnson said that he would take this stone for himself and take it to his mother. Turning around and looking crazy, Johnson asked what would happen if he swallowed it. He was interrupted by Yang, who said that Johnson would become the new puppet of the one who created this stone. There is a hut in the middle of the swamp, surrounded by stinking swamps and dead trees. Ian stood inside the hut with his arms crossed and said that it wasn't that bad. In front of him were mana crystals, silver coins and a necklace made of a bloodshot eye, which increased characteristics. But Yang wondered what of these were in the hut of the kobold leader, holding a magic stone in his hands. Ian thought that compared to other items found, this was the largest catch. Thinking that the stone would become very useful if it was cleaned, Ian put his hand into his robe, from under which a magical light shone. Ian looked back at the old bartender, thinking that there was not enough space here, but even this would do. When the hero woke up in the game, Ian Hope's skills were at the same level, but everything else was reset to the starting point of the game, including quests, items, and time intervals. The hero wonders why his level and skills weren't reset then. Did someone who pulled him into this world really want his character to disappear? In his thoughts, Ian complains, thinking that those who dragged him into this could have thanked him by adding points to him. The bartender, who had put on the armor and picked up an axe, asked Ian if he could really keep all this for himself. Yang told the old man not to worry, because he did not get this equipment for free, and then goes to check on the fulfillment of his order. Approaching the villagers with not particularly pleased expressions, Ian said that they all did a good job. Thinking that although the villagers did not make much effort in the search, Yang decided to check if there were any traces of magic nearby using magical vision. Having examined half of the village assistants, Ian finds no traces of magical energy near them. But then Ian noticed traces of magic in the bag of one of the villagers with blonde hair. Coming closer, Ian, putting his palm to his forehead, asked the guy if he was really so stupid, which surprised the villager. Putting the blade to the villager's throat, Yang ordered him to immediately empty his pockets. Before he could answer Ian that he didn't understand what he was talking about, the villager's eyes became bloodshot. Surprised, Ian watched as the villager was enveloped in a dark aura, causing him to only groan. The frightened villagers began to call out to Johnson, to which he only laughed madly. Johnson's eyes began to glow, and his body began to distort, as if something was possessing him. Throwing the blade over his shoulder, Ian assumed that Johnson was consumed by a curse. Realizing that this was no longer the same person with whom he had spoken earlier, Ian stabbed Johnson in the neck. But Johnson managed to stop the blade a few centimeters from his neck with his bare hand. Looking at Ian with his violet eyes, Johnson said that Ian was a hot-tempered guy, because he decided to immediately cut off his head. With a dissatisfied look directed at Johnson, Yang only said that he was annoyed by him. While Johnson held the blade grinning, Ian said that he thought he had been swallowed up by a curse, but he was an imposter from the very beginning. Johnson says that he simply has no words because Ian ruined the field where he planted his seeds. Moreover, Ian also hid them. Yang realizes that he is talking about contaminated magic and believes that he is confused by the loss of connection with the objects that he placed in subspace. In addition, Ian notes that the attack on the kobold village was very opportune, because otherwise they would have already attacked the village, after which he admits that from Johnson's point of view he is only a variable. Smirking, Ian responds to Johnson, saying that they were apparently in a hurry. Ian says that the magical power he created will be put to good use and calls Jackson a black magician. Johnson, enraged, called Ian a bastard with an arrogant face, at which point his hand changed to resemble a demon's paw. With his clawed paw, the black magician broke Yang's blade without any effort in one movement. Jumping back, the distressed Yang says that it was a good sword that he recently took out, but the black magician immediately rushed in his direction. Wielding a broken sword, Yang hits the magician's hand, winning a couple of seconds for maneuver, but the black magician's paw almost overtakes Ian, who barely managed to dodge, and Johnson begins to push the hero. The magician, intoxicated with his superiority, decided that he had already won, but immediately a fireball flew into his chest. A huge fiery explosion thundered, from the shock wave of which fragments of stones flew in all directions. Fireballs danced around Ian, while Ian himself, holding a broken sword firmly in his hand, looked confidently at his opponent. The shocked black magician in burnt clothes only looked at Ian in amazement, asking if he was really the same guy. Yang replied that he talks a lot, after which the fire covered his hand, turning into a fireball. Balls of fire flew at the black magician one after another, causing devastating damage. The villagers screamed in horror, asking what kind of nightmare was happening here. Yang created another ball of fire and shot it straight at Johnson's chest, sending him flying. Johnson's charred body fell to the floor. His eyes continued to shine and his body was shrouded in dark magic. Groaning helplessly, the magician said that earlier the guy was just pretending, and now that he had shown his true strength, he would definitely find him again. The black magician told Ian not to forget that his soul was forever enclosed in this body while Ian swung the blade. With a flourish, Yang tore off the head of the burnt wizard, simultaneously breaking through the ground and scattering fragments of earth to the sides. Johnson's severed head rolled far from his body, only croaking necromancer before dying. Leaning on his headless body, Yang nodded his head and said that these were just typical conversations between the murdered and the murderer. Yang forcefully pierced the black magician's chest with his hand, splashing blood in all directions. Having taken out the magic stone from Johnson's chest, Yang noticed that he did not expect that the stone would be smaller than that of the kobold leader. Surrounded by villagers, Ian stood up from his knees asking who wanted to surrender voluntarily. In the tavern behind the counter, the barman was wiping a mug with a rag. When he heard the noise, he looked towards the entrance. Opening the door to the tavern, Ian entered, holding a small bag in his hand. Having sat down at the table, Ian put the bag on the table. The bartender asked if he fulfilled this request just as quickly. The old man said in a muffled voice that no matter how you look at it, this doesn't look like a magician, after which Ian told the bartender to be careful with his tongue. The bartender tells Ian not to take it into his head, because he is different from ordinary magicians, and that he understands why he hid it because magicians are not liked. An angry Yang created a fireball in his hand, telling the old man that he was talking too much and that he could warm him up, to which the frightened old man refused. The bartender said that what bothered him was that the black magician apparently harbored a grudge against Ian. Yang replies that it doesn't matter, thinking that he is still destined to die by his hand. The hero notices that he has completed all the additional tasks of this city that he received from the bartender, but he still lacks experience, and therefore it's time to move on. A guy with a short haircut turns to a woman in armor, saying that their predictions have come true. The guy told the woman that the person who destroyed the kobolds was apparently in the village. A battle in a stone fortress, blood everywhere, severed heads of soldiers here and there. Someone or something kills a squad of soldiers one by one with incredible speed, leaving only red lines in the air. The soldiers surrounded the fighter from head to toe, stained with blood and surrounded by headless bodies. This armored fighter turned out to be Maeve Laurel, an avenger who sheds blood. Maeve, with a lightning-fast jerk, takes the heads off two soldiers in front of her, cutting the third in half. Maeve Laurel was originally a knight of Agellan, but blinded by revenge, she became the mid-boss of the first chapter of Aquilonia. Ian did not know the reason for Maeve's vindictiveness, but it was rumored that he had entered the palace alone to kill King Agellan. In addition, she spared no effort in attacking, even despite how close the king was to death. Her difficulty level was absurdly high for the difficulty level of a mid-boss in the first chapter. Maeve and her assistant enter the tavern, saying that they heard that there was a person here who single-handedly destroyed the kobolds. Assistant Maeve, looking at Ian, asks if he is this person, which makes Ian noticeably tense. Without uttering a word, Yang pointed with his thumb at the head of the kobold leader adorned on the wall. The impressed assistant said that this was incredible, because even elite border guard soldiers did not want to take on such work. The assistant apologized for the questions, saying that they needed to make sure he was the one they were looking for, and then introduced his companion. She turned out to be Maeve Laurel, a follower of Lu Solar, an apostle of the Tauren, a guardian of the southern borders and the sword of Agellan. Ian tensed, thinking that such a coincidence of circumstances was very inopportune due to its unexpectedness. Ian notices that Maeve is different in appearance, suggesting that at the moment she has not yet descended to the Avenger. The assistant introduced himself, calling himself Maeve's squire named Philip and saying that he was glad to meet Ian. Ian introduced himself to Maeve and Philip, calling himself a mercenary, and asking what they needed from him. Philip immediately asked Ian if he had found anything unusual in the lair of the destroyed kobolds. Ian asked what he meant by unusual, to which Philip replied that he could find things marked with black magic or something that could disturb him. Looking at Maeve, Ian was surprised, because not only did she not stoop to the level of an Avenger, but she was also looking for a dark magician. Having decided to find out the details first, Young replied that even if he found something, he is a mercenary, and therefore does not perform services without payment, and then offers a deal. Ian decided to turn directly to Maeve, arguing that as a knight she can make important decisions herself. Philip shouted about Ian's rudeness, but Maeve interrupted him, answering that Ian was wrong. The voice seemed familiar to Ian, after which Maeve apologized for the rudeness of her squire and took off her helmet. Maeve replied that she was usually not inclined to talk to strangers and that was the only reason why Philip spoke instead of her. Ian cannot believe that Maeve was really a woman, because he had never heard her voice before. Maeve offered to continue the conversation, after which she said that she would pay Ian for the information and asked Philip to get the money. Ian was surprised that Maeve gave him the most valuable gold coin of the Empire, to which she replied that this would help him understand the seriousness of the problem. Ian told Maeve and Philip that the kobolds he destroyed were being raised by someone. He continued by saying that their leader grew up receiving magic from this man, because an object was inserted into his chest in which the infected magical power was embedded. Ian threw a magic stone on the table under the surprised looks of Philip and Maeve, saying that it was a ball of a dark magician. Then Ian said that the dark magician promised to find and kill him for ruining his plans by taking the ball. Maeve confirmed that the object looked ominous, saying that a certain Vernon was right and the seeds of darkness were indeed growing in the kingdom. Maeve continued by saying that now all they have to do is find the dark magician, throwing the wallet in front of Ian's face. The woman offered to buy the stone for 10 gold coins, to which Young agreed. Maeve then said that she wanted Ian to go with her to the royal castle as a witness. Immediately before Ian's eyes, a panel appeared with an additional quest in which you need to accompany Maeve and kill the dark magician, offering a reward in the form of skill points. Smiling, Jan pulled his hand into subspace under his jacket, saying that since he was a mercenary, they should conclude a contract. The indignant Philip screamed that Ian was demanding money from them, having already received a considerable sum. Ian continued by saying that if Maeve and Philip hire him, he will help them track down the dark magician. Maeve asks if Ian knows where the magician is, to which Ian said that searching for people is his job, even though it was a lie because Ian already knows where the dark magician is hiding. Then Ian added that he harbored a grudge against the dark magician, and therefore Maeve and Philip would have to add compensation because they had a common goal. After some thought, Maeve agreed to hire Ian, saying that the contract was signed in her name. Sitting astride his black horse, Jan adjusted his bracer, looking to the side. Maeve asked Ian if he is sure that the dark magician will be where they are going. Jan replied that he was sure, saying that the burial forest was the most likely place where a dark magician could be hiding. The grave forest, also known as a forest where you can enter but from which you cannot leave. Having learned that Ian is going to the grave forest, the innkeeper asks Ian what he intends to find there, but Ian interrupts him by telling him to continue explaining. The old man said that this forest was cultivated by ancient fairies over an underground tomb and was used for the burial of soldiers, but soon the common people also began to make burials there. The old man continued by saying that it was so long ago that gradually the fog began to thicken and those who entered the forest never returned. Having made sure that the information coincided with the game one, Ian decided that he needed to go there right now, while Maeve had doubts because the forest was in the very center of the kingdom. Ian replies that the magician sowed the seeds and waited for the harvest, and it would be convenient for him to do this in a place where problems would not break out, and the place in the center of the kingdom is ideal for the implementation of his plans. Ian said he would tell them more later, offering to settle down for the night, to which Maeve agreed. Philip suggested going deeper into the forest, because soon there would be a stream where we could accommodate. Ian notices with displeasure that there is a pack of wolves in the forest, and he doesn't want to lose sleep over them, which surprises Philip. Embarrassed, Philip shouted that he would collect wood for the fire. Smiling, Ian noticed that the stupid boy shouted throughout the forest. Someone with magical vision watched the group of heroes, grinning his mouth. A pack of wolves, led by a huge two-legged leader, watched Ian and company. Ian, Maeve and Philip, having set up camp, are sitting on logs, warming themselves by the fire, while stew is being prepared on the fire in a saucepan. Ian looks at Maeve, thinking that now she doesn't look like an avenger who will kill the king and turn the castle into a bloody battlefield. He came to the conclusion that she had a definite reason for this, like everyone who turned away from their path. Philip, holding a large spoon, enthusiastically says that they will finally open the package that Ian is holding in his hands. The woman from the tavern calls out to Ian, handing him a package containing some ham and cheese. Holding the bundle in her hands, the woman smiles and asks Ian to take care of himself and be more careful. Philip clasped his hands together, saying that at that moment the girl's face expressed love, but Ian tells him to stop talking if Philip does not want to eat only rice for dinner. Surprised, Philip asked if Ian was going to share, to which Ian replied that he would share if Philip closed his mouth. The wind blew. Ian put the package on his knee, which made Philip decide that Ian was just making fun of him. Sticking his hand into subspace, Ian tells Philip to shut up while looking over his shoulder. At first, not understanding, the group rose, and soon Maeve sensed an alien presence, calling the enemies uninvited guests. Philip turned around, asking why the wolf's roar was heard so close, after which he screamed in fear. The thicket behind the heroes was dotted with the burning eyes of wolves looking at their prey. The shocked Philip asked if these were all wolves. Philip asked Ian what they should do, while Ian, expressing obvious dissatisfaction, grabbed his sword and prepared for battle, saying that he would have to postpone dinner. Huge wolves, shrouded in dark magic, sniffing and threateningly approached the heroes. Maeve says that the wolves are too big for ordinary ones and asks if they are connected with the black magician, to which Ian replies that they will find out about this after they kill the wolves. Taking out the blade, Maeve agrees, ordering the frightened Philip to step back and guard the horses. Taking the sword in both hands, Maeve tells Ian to go guard the horses with Philip. Ian refused, saying that Maeve and Philip should guard the horses, and he would take care of the wolves. Maeve was indignant at this answer, but Ian explained that her armor could not defeat clever wolves. Philip called out to Maeve, saying that the wolves were about to attack from the other side, interrupting the skirmish with Ian. Ian told Maeve not to worry because he was going to do what only he could do and that there would be no losses. Silently agreeing, Maeve rushed off in the other direction, telling Ian not to die. Gritting his teeth and expressing a certain dissatisfaction, Ian answered Maeve, telling her not to die either. Looking at a pack of wolves a few meters away from him, Ian was surprised at their number, saying that there were too many wolves. One of the wolves with eyes burning with fire immediately jumped out at Ian, but Ian managed to dodge and the wolf's jaws only slammed loudly a few centimeters from Ian's head. A noticeably angry Yang, enveloping the hilt of the sword with magical energy, said that using fire magic he would destroy them in an instant. But looking back at Maeve and Philip, Ian thought that he shouldn't show all his trump cards at once, because he doesn't know at what point his allies will become enemies. Streams of wind enveloped Ian, and he said that he would have to be as inconspicuous as possible. Saying that this is the best he can do in this situation, Jan used the Wind Blade spell from Lower Grey Magic. An inferior grey magic called Wind Blade amplifies the wind's blows, allowing Yang to add momentum to his movement. Two wolves attack Ian, but having managed to prepare the spell, Ian delivers a devastating blow to the face of one of the wolves. The wind directed by the blade turns into a sharp blade, so Jan's blow blows off the heads of both wolves with one blow. The giant wolf pounces on Ian, who is distracted by the wolves, with his mouth gaping. Having practically slammed its mouth on Ian's torso, the monster is shocked that it failed to kill the enemy. Jan used a low-grey magic spell, Wind Curtain, which prevented the wolf from attacking. Having tightened his grip on the sword, Yang asked the enemy if he was surprised, because the beast felt Yang in its mouth. After which Yang immediately chops off the monster's head with one powerful slash of his blade. Wiping the blood from his face, Ian turned around when he heard Philip screaming that two more were on the way. Maeve cut off the heads of the wolves with lightning speed with her blade while Philip covered himself with a shield and held the horses by the reins. Ian thought that Philip and Maeve's skills were even better than he thought. Although Maeve had no equal, it turned out that Philip was also good at supporting. However, Ian understands that the battle is dragging on and this is very bad, because this is one of the pack's methods of hunting. Intending to find the hiding leader as soon as possible, Yang used magical vision. Exploring the flows of magic, Yang peers into the dense thicket of the forest, trying to find the leader. Feeling the flow of magic emanating from the leader, Yang turns around and notices him in the forest behind him. Ian called out to Maeve, who was covered from head to toe, busy protecting Philip and the horses from the wolves. Once again enveloping himself in the wind, Ian told Maeve to focus on protecting the horses, because he intended to cut off the head of the leader of the wolves. Ian immediately disappeared into the forest, while the shocked Maeve asked in bewilderment what he was going to do, telling Ian to come back. Using magic to walk on air, Yang rushed towards the leader, ignoring the other wolves. Maeve looks after Ian rushing into the thicket, pursued by the wolves who turned sharply behind him. Confused, Maeve wonders whether Ian really just used the wind as a support, or he imagined it, but Philip immediately responds to her. Turning around, Maeve saw Philip begging for help. One of the wolves was trying to gnaw through his shield. Maeve goes to help Philip, while a dark silhouette flashes in the thicket behind her. Having flown some distance into the depths of the forest in pursuit of the leader of the wolves, Yang landed. Yang said that his thought was confirmed, because even the leader is still a wild beast that chases its prey if it runs away. A huge, terrifying werewolf appeared before Ian, with shining violet eyes, shrouded in an aura of dark magic. Ian calls the werewolf a vile degenerate, noting that he brought friends with him, and then notices the system message that appears. Looking at the wolf pack, Ian sighs with satisfaction, saying that he has been waiting for him for a very long time. Ian's eyes sparkle with enthusiasm and he unsheathes his blade, provocatively calling the werewolf a stinking mongrel. The task, Cursed Indolf, appeared on the system quest panel, in which Ian must kill the damned werewolf Indolf, after which Ian says that the werewolf is now his victim. With a loud roar, the leader incites his pack and the wolves pounce on Ian with open mouths. But using the wind blade, Yang immediately cuts down all the wolves rushing towards him, leaving behind a bloody storm. Shaking off the blood from the blade, Ian said that he expected Indolf to be vile, but he turned out to be even more vile than in the game. Ian taunts Indolf, saying that he cannot attack him personally without any assistance. Indolf, succumbing to provocation, jumps off the ground with enormous force, pouncing on Ian with a roar. As the werewolf leaps, he concentrates dark magic into his clawed paw, intent on casting a spell. Indolf creates 3 dark waves of magical energy aimed at Ian, who stands motionless. Yang used the low-grade magic skill Rotating Barricade, blocking the waves of the werewolf's dark magic. Yang's barricade cracks and breaks under the pressure of the dark force, and Yang notices that this spell is not enough. After which Yang begins to prepare the next spell, enveloping his hand in cold. Yang uses a lower blue magic spell called Ice Shield, materializing a shield of ice in front of him. The werewolf's magic breaks through the wind barricade, but hits the ice shield without harming Ian. Landing on the ground, the leader looks in surprise at Ian, who managed to block his magic. Ian peeks out from behind an ice sheet covered in cracks and marks from dark waves, grinning. Yang's shield shines with a bright light. The werewolf Indolf clenched his teeth, preparing for the worst. The ice shield explodes, turning into dozens of ice shards flying towards Indolf. Ice hail flies at the werewolf at incredible speed, and although Indolf covers himself with his hands, the ice cuts through the werewolf's flesh. Using magic, Indolf jumps back, breaking with his paws on the ground and leaving his copy behind. Raising dust from breaking on the ground, the werewolf inhales heavily while the wounds inflicted by the ice bleed. Holding the sword in his hands, Yang, smiling, asks the werewolf if he has refreshed himself and mockingly asks if he should scratch him again. Once again leading to provocation, the werewolf furiously attacks Yang with a speed capable of breaking the sound barrier. Concentrating dark mana in his paw, the werewolf struck Yang with destructive force, leaving a shock wave. The rampaging werewolf throws blow after blow, trying to hit Ian and cause as much damage as possible. Having stopped his rampage, the werewolf notices only felled trees, smoke and crushed earth around him, without finding Ian. Looking over his shoulder, Indolf sees Yang appearing at lightning speed behind him with a sword raised to strike. Ian deals a crushing blow to Indolf, cutting his paw, causing the werewolf to scream in pain. Having cut through the werewolf's paw to the middle, Ian realized that the wind blade would not be enough to win. Looking angrily at Ian, the werewolf prepared to counterattack, raising his second paw to strike, strengthening it with magic. Yang strengthens the blade stuck in the werewolf's paw, after which, illuminating the area with light, the sword immediately cuts off the werewolf's paw. Waving the bleeding stump, Indolf screams in pain as blood spurts from his paw. Spinning like a whirlwind, Yang tells the werewolf that he will simply blow him up using the vacuum explosion spell, aiming at the second paw. Gnawing into the flesh with the blade, Yang activates a spell, undermining the werewolf's paw, leaving only a huge wound. In agony, the werewolf retreats back, liters of blood pour from his wounds until Indolf himself can only growl. Holding his now broken sword in his hands, Yang asks the werewolf how long ago he left the village. Falling to his knees in front of Ian, Indolf wheezes exhaustedly and bleeds. Suddenly the werewolf begins to exude a huge amount of dark energy, unwilling to give up and answer questions. Ian is surprised, asking if he is leaving, and manages to cover himself with an ice shield before being thrown back by a wave of dark magic. Yang, with great difficulty, blocks the dark magic of the werewolf with an ice shield right in the air, being thrown back. Surprised, Ian saw the armless Indolf flying above him, intending to escape. While flying, Indolf turns around, trying to see Ian, hoping that he managed to escape. To Indolf's surprise, an icy hail appears on his way, preventing his escape. Huge pieces of ice fell from above onto the downed werewolf, surrounding him on all sides. The surprised werewolf looked up and saw that he was locked in an ice prison. Dropping the broken sword to the ground, Yang asked the werewolf if he was about to run away. While maintaining the ice prison spell, Ian says that he was surprised and decided that the werewolf would escape. Gathering magical power in his palms and preparing to deal a crushing blow to the werewolf, Ian prepared a spell. With a furious cry, the werewolf rammed the wall of the ice prison, breaking off fragments from the walls. The werewolf's strength was enough to break through the wall of the prison and escape, even despite his injuries. Ian called out to the werewolf, asking where he was going, the idiot, and the werewolf turned his gaze to Ian. Concentrating the spell in his hand, Yang jumped on the werewolf, asking if he was going to run away to call his assistance and come back. With a look full of anger, Yang created a ball of magical energy and, saying that he could not allow the werewolf to leave, attacked. An incredible explosion hit the werewolf as the residual magical power of the spell spilled throughout the area. Having taken the full blow of Ian's spell, the werewolf fell to his knees and was so exhausted that he could not move. Seeing that the werewolf was still alive, Yan used a wind blade spell to finish what he started, hitting the monster right in the stomach. Hitting the werewolf's stomach, Yan created a vacuum explosion in his hand, leaving the enemy no chance. The defeated leader of the werewolf fell to the ground at Ian's feet, choking on his own blood. Satisfied with his victory, Yang, covered in blood, sighed with relief, looking at the body of the werewolf. For a moment, the werewolf's eyes glowed dark purple again, but soon the werewolf breathed his last. As soon as Ian decided that he had won, the werewolf began to move again. Taken by surprise, Ian tensed, because his amount of mana was greatly depleted. The dying werewolf took on his human form and thanked Ian with tears in his eyes. Surprised, Ian admitted that he did not expect such an outcome, and asked the werewolf to give him some kind of hint or trophy, because you can't put a thank you in your pocket. With the last of his strength, the werewolf answered Ian, croaking only 2 words. Ian did not hear what the werewolf said and asked which deer he was talking about, but the werewolf was already dead. Ian comes to the conclusion that the werewolf, before his death, told him that he could not eat the deer. Surrounded by the butchered bodies of wolves, Maeve stands guard while Philip sits by the fire. Hearing a crash in the bushes, Maeve called out to the approaching one, calling the name Yang, waiting for the mercenary to return. Removing the branches in front of him, Ian came out of the forest, carrying the head of a werewolf in his hand, and answered Maeve that she had guessed right and that they were now safe. Frightened, Philip fell to the floor, shouting in panic the question of what Ian was holding in his hand. Ian held his head in his hand closer to Philip, explaining that this was a werewolf, and that it was he who led the wolves. The shocked Maeve saw her head and looked at Ian, realizing that he really defeated the leader alone. Continuing her thought, she decided that perhaps Ian Hope was really the one who could track down the black magician. Maeve stopped her thoughts by asking why he was the first to enter the battle. A mistake could cost him his life, and he promised to go with her to the castle. Ian replied that the leader could have escaped if they had attacked him together, to which Maeve replied that this was just his assumption. Ian tells Maeve to look around, because nearby were the bodies of weak wolves that she and Philip had defeated, while the leader was waiting for the moment when they would become weak. Shaking his head, Ian says that the werewolf hid and was just watching them, which means that he is not that strong. Yang continues by saying that the leader was attacked only because he was alone, and that he is not so noble and loyal as to die in vain, because he is not a knight but a mercenary. Realizing that she had nothing to object to, Maeve asked Ian to warn her in the future when he had a similar plan. Snarling, Yang replied that he would inform them after the group decided to leave the place littered with wolf corpses. Having asked Philip to bring his horse, Ian thought about where his reward for the completed task was, and a system window immediately appeared. The window reported that Ian received a point of physical strength for completing the task, after which Ian noticed that this character was bad, and therefore he relied on intelligence and willpower. Turning his attention to the additional line of rewards, Yang saw an item called a core with a concentrated curse, which he did not remember in the game. The item turned out to be possible to use immediately, which leads to instant madness of the user. Concluding that the core might be needed later, Ian hid it in subspace just as Philip brought his horse. The horse suddenly began to rebel, bucking against Philip, but seeing the aura around Ian, the horse became alarmed. Snatching the reins from Philip's hands, the horse fell to the floor in one movement, foaming at the mouth. Philip said that she died. Annoyed at how this was possible, Ian thought that the cause was the blood of the monster with which he was covered. A kneeling Philip asked Ian for forgiveness, while Maeve lectures him that he should have been more careful because there are a lot of corpses nearby. Maeve says she's sorry, offering to pay for the horse, but Ian refuses, saying that Philip didn't do it on purpose. But Ian continued, smiling mysteriously, saying that he was a little tired, which made Philip noticeably afraid. Moonlight illuminates the river right in the middle of the forest. Fireflies fly around the river. A breathless Philip announced the group's arrival at a stream in the middle of the forest, hobbling with difficulty. With a dissatisfied look, Jan on horseback noticed that Philip's horse was very good. Having called out to the tired Philip, Jan threw him the same package with ham and cheese, which Philip was immensely happy about. Ian ordered Philip to cook half of it, first washing his hands and cleaning his armor after cooking, until Philip flawlessly agreed with everything. Realizing that Philip was easy to command, Ian began to take off his blood-stained armor. Maeve called out and asked what he was doing. Yang replied that as she could see, he was taking off his armor to wash it, thinking that his whole body was sticky with blood. Hearing Ian's answer, Maeve also began to take off her armor, to which Ian asked the lady in surprise what she was doing. Maeve said that her armor also needed to be washed, and offered to do it together. In a stupor, Ian stood in the middle of the stream, wondering if what was happening was normal for this world while Maeve was upstream. Looking tensely at Maeve, Ian caught himself thinking that she was even closer than he thought. Maeve called out to Ian, asking if he was injured, to which Ian was indignant because she decided to ask only now. Standing behind the stone, Maeve said that she was impressed, because Ian fought with a werewolf and was not even wounded. Maeve notices Ian's fighting style, calling him unique, and noticing how he manipulates Philip, she says that Ian is a better knight than her. Maeve continues, saying that an ordinary person from a noble family is not uncommon, which Ian counters by asking what if he is a commoner, realizing that Maeve is making some kind of guesses. Taking water into her palm, Maeve said that she understood Ian, saying that she, too, cannot talk about her origins just like him, since she decided to live as a Tauren apostle and not a girl from a noble family. An apostle is one who has been blessed by God and has become a member of his family, being able to use some of his abilities. Straightening his hair, Ian asked Maeve what kind of goddess Tauren was, to which Maeve was surprised and asked if he was really asking about this. Smiling, Yang replied that he was not too friendly with the gods, keeping in mind that there were too many gods in Aquilonia to know about them all in detail. Maeve replied that Tauren's service is not easy, because she is the goddess of order, the second daughter of Luz Solar, and the sword that punishes all sins. Maeve says that as her apostle, she cannot lie and ignore sins, otherwise she will lose her favor along with the blessing. Yang replies that if Tauren is called Reprimand, then her other names should be even cooler. The main motives in Aquilonia are betrayal and moral decay, therefore, in addition to the well-known names, the gods have additional ones. Other names can become their weakness, such as another sun god named Luz Solar Blind Faith. Maeve replies that if Ian talks about other names Tauren, Of course they exist, and gives the example of the name retribution. She says that stopping sin can replace someone's revenge, and sometimes after that you yourself become the object of revenge. Therefore another name for censure is retribution. Maeve believes that this is why righteous revenge is under the protection of Tauren, while Jan begins to understand why Maeve became an avenger shedding blood. He realized that Maeve didn't just fall, she even went from the apostle of reprimand to the apostle of retribution. Ian thought that Maeve herself told him about Tauren's restrictions, because being an apostle, violating God's will get rid of the blessing. Knowing these details, Jan could find the answer. But the question is why she became a demon of revenge, whether this was caused by the death of her family or hatred of someone. Ian wondered what would happen if he prevented Maeve from becoming an avenger shedding blood. Then he changes his mind, because only when the bloody avenger appears does the first boss of the game appear. Ian interrupts his thoughts, dwelling on the fact that he does not have enough information and that it is worth observing more. Maeve believes that Ian does not serve any god, which Ian confirms by adding that he does not intend to serve any of them. Maeve says that God is already watching him, and perhaps wants to get into his service. Looking up at the moon, Ian, with an eloquent expression on his face, showed the potential god his middle finger, after which he told Maeve that it was time to go to dinner. Beaming with delight, Philip told Ian that he had once again thought about the fact that he alone is capable of defeating monsters like a werewolf, and that is why Ian is amazing. Confused, Ian remembers that Philip has been talking about this since yesterday evening, and replies that there is nothing amazing about it because werewolves are widespread. Thoughtful, Philip replies that he has never met so many monsters during his entire travels with Maeve. Surprised, Ian asks if they hardly ever encountered monsters, remembering that since their arrival in the kingdom of Agellan, the number of monsters encountered has exceeded 100. Maeve confirms Philip's words, saying that along the entire Kwando route they met only a couple of goblins and kobolds. Ian asks if they really followed the path of Kwando, remembering that after leaving the swamp, he arrived in the city of Balk in the kingdom of Agellan. Having started his activities as a mercenary, he solved the problems of the city by moving along Kwando, the main road of the kingdom, and killing all the monsters along the way. Frustrated, Ian slaps himself in the face with his palm, answering Philip and Maeve that it was he who cleared the way for them. Turning around, he told Philip that his good days were over, because there was a lot more crap in the kingdom than he thought. The trio of heroes emerges onto a cliff overlooking a burned and destroyed village, still smoking from the attack. Surprised, Ian said that he didn't expect that the crap mentioned in the conversation with Philip would be found so soon. Philip, mentioning the name Lou Solar as a surprise, asked the others if this was the work of robbers. Philip noticed that this was happening not only on the outskirts but also near Kwando's path, after which he noticed a terrifying aura emanating from Maeve. With eyes full of rage, Maeve said that she would not forgive the robbers for allowing themselves to just destroy other people's houses. Ian sighed indifferently, thinking that Maeve was being dramatic, suggesting that it was precisely because they were distracted by such trifles that they still had not been able to find the black magician. Thinking that the village would have become much more useful if there had been a quest for him in it, Ian noticed silhouettes of people nearby. Maeve answered that soon they will find out whose hands this is, because they can find out information about what happened here with those people. Seeing a group of people, Maeve's eyes filled with anger, and even the air around her was distorted with hatred. A group of people are half-heartedly digging a hole. One of them pokes a dagger into the ground while the second just stands with his foot resting on a stone. A man with a scar on his face and armed with a crossbow commands the group to dig a hole normally, calling them idiots. The crossbowman asks the others if they really need so much time to dig 6 graves, after which he says to do everything right because he had a bad dream yesterday. Hearing the clatter of hooves behind him, the crossbowman turned around and saw Maeve rushing towards him with a blade at her advantage. The shocked gang, not understanding, shouts over each other, asking what the knight suddenly forgot near this village. The leader of the gang orders everyone to grab crossbows and aim at the horse, because the knights have no mercy for anyone except the peasants. Maeve, who in the eyes of the bandits resembled a monster, furiously shouted to throw down her weapon and fall to her knees. The confused leader of the group asks why they should throw down their weapons, and they won't do it unless Maeve has a good reason, as long as one of the men is hysterically firing a crossbow. The leader calls out to the shooter, condemning him for not having been asked to shoot at the knight. Maeve cut the crossbow bolt flying at her with one swing of her blade. The shocked bandits panic, screaming out loud from not understanding what kind of monster appeared before them. Maeve swings her sword, filling the blade with magical energy, preparing a crushing blow. With a wave of her blade, Maeve's magical blow releases a beam of light that pierces right through one of the bandits. Turning around, the leader saw that there was only the lower half of his previously living servant. The leader of the bandits, not having time to think that the attacking knight was a crazy bastard, noticed that this same knight was already standing next to him. Having fallen to their knees, the bandits tell Maeve, calling her master, that they did not commit a sin and that she did not even give them time to explain. Maeve replies that she will listen to their excuses later, transferring the right of interrogation to Ian. Seeing Ian, the bandit leader is shocked, speaking about him as if he knows the mercenary. Ian is visibly surprised that the bandit leader suddenly calls Ian by name. The leader of the gang is kneeling in front of Maeve on horseback, pointing her sword in his direction. Drops of sweat are running down the leader's face from tension. He was not surprised that he had a bad dream yesterday, given the current situation. Maeve replied that she would listen to their excuses after her companion interrogated them. After hearing the word interrogation, the leader did not understand what was happening. The knight's companion who rode up to him turned out to be none other than Ian Hope, whom the leader immediately recognized. Ian looked questioningly at the man, and he replied that he was the hunter Miguel, a fellow mercenary, and that they often saw each other in the city of Balk. Ian, who did not recognize the hunter, remembers that he came to the city of Balk immediately after the swamps, and assumed that he saw the mercenary in a bar. Maeve asked Ian if he knew the group, to which Ian replied that he only remembered their faces. Miguel, delighted that Ian recognized him, said that he would be happy to answer all questions, since he would be able to determine whether he was lying or not. Looking at Miguel, Ian thought that if the hunter had continued to pretend to be familiar, he would have torn out his limbs, but the mercenary apparently was not lacking in ingenuity. Ian then told Miguel to answer how long ago the village was reduced to smoking ruins. Miguel replied that the village was destroyed before the mercenaries even arrived. A group of armored soldiers with torches at the ready marches through the village, setting houses on fire along the way. An old man who looked like the headman of the village grabbed the soldier by the sleeve, asking how the great king allowed this, to which the soldier replied that this was his order. Another soldier shouts that this is the king's order to move all the inhabitants to Orendel, and orders the old man to move. Surprised Philip and Maeve cannot believe that the Marquis Burchard, who is also the king, had a hand in the burning of the village. Maeve tells Philip that most likely the reason for this was the war, preparations for which are underway throughout the country. Jan comes to the conclusion that from what was said earlier, it is clear that the kingdom is gathering labor in its main base in preparation for war with its neighbors. Jan says that if a war breaks out, it will not be possible to protect all the territories, and that since this place would have been plundered and burned anyway, the king decided to do it himself. Jan thinks that the Marquis's real motives are completely different from what he said, and that Jan is surprised at how quickly they began preparations. Ian's next question was what kind of corpses the group intended to bury in the hole. Miguel replied that this was the family of the head of the village, and that the soldiers executed them for refusing to migrate to another city. He continued by saying that he met several villagers and that they gave him some coins to bury, so the group dug a grave. Ian asked the question, "And also?" To which Miguel replied that that's all he could tell about the bodies, after which an awkward silence followed. Miguel explodes with a cry that he told Ian the truth, swearing to Luz Solar that everything he said was not a lie. Disappointed, Ian realizes that this is true, thinking that the conversation was useless because the quest window never appeared. Maeve asks Ian if he believes Miguel's words, to which Ian sighs and says that she believes him. Maeve replied that she understood and said that she would go into the village to see if anyone was left there. An irritated Ian, looking piercingly at Maeve, tells her that she is too meticulous. Ian, feeling Miguel's yearning gaze on him, turned around, drawing his blade, asking if he wanted to die, to which the hunter, laughing in panic, refused. Saying that he had cleared his name, Miguel asked permission to continue the burial of the family of the head of the village. Thanks for the permission, Miguel says that they need to finish the burial quickly in order to return to their main mission. Having finished babbling in front of Ian, Miguel immediately growled menacingly at his henchmen, ordering them to blow their asses and get down to business. Philip says that Miguel must have a big mission, since they needed so many people. Caught by surprise, Miguel, holding his hand to his neck, replies that he is embarrassed to talk about it. Philip asks Miguel why he looks at Ian like that, but Ian himself answers Philip that among the mercenaries there are bastards who steal requests from others, and tells Miguel that he may not answer. An embittered Ian asks if Miguel thinks he is such a bastard. Miguel replies in horror that he doesn't think so. Miguel says that they have probably already heard about a pack of wolves that devours people, and they say that in the forest where the heroes are heading, a huge pack has gathered. He continues the story by saying that the wolves also devoured the customer's son, because who else but a former hunter can fulfill such a question? Miguel stared questioningly at Philip and Ian, who looked at each other asking why they were looking at each other like that. Pulling his hand down, Ian told Miguel that they had no intention of stealing the group's request. Having removed the werewolf's head from the horse, Ian showed it to Miguel, saying that he had already decided this issue. Beaming with pride, Philip asks Ian if he took good care of his head, to which Ian agrees, promising to share the reward. Taken by surprise, Miguel says that he has never heard of werewolves and wolf packs, to which Ian replied that this werewolf used his subordinates to do all the dirty work while he himself hid in the shadows, saying that in this he and Miguel are similar. Ian returned to the topic of the request, asking Miguel in which city he received this request. Evening came. Maeve on horseback asked about the village on the way to the valley, asking if he would take the mercenaries with him. Ian agrees, saying that the journey will only take 2 days and that those who lost their families because of wolves deserve to know the truth. Jan continued by saying that they also need to prepare supplies before going to the grave forest. Maeve said that she understood, continuing that she did not like these mercenaries because mercenaries do not have faith in God, singling out Ian as an exception. Smiling through the pain, Miguel replies that it is an honor for him to go with Maeve. A group of heroes waited while Miguel's henchmen buried the family of the village chief. With the thought that night is the time for monsters and now one cannot let one's guard down, Jan concentrated and used magical vision. Looking at Maeve, Ian saw an aura of dark magic enveloping her, which, in his opinion, could not be a mistake. Maeve asked Ian what was the matter, to which he replied that apparently Maeve was not yet possessed by the black magician's curse. Without having time to ask why he decided this, Maeve immediately rushed to her belt bag. Holding in her hands the magic stone that had previously been in her bag, Maeve said that she had not noticed any changes. Ian replied that the changes were so insignificant that they could hardly be unnoticed. Yang sees weak but regular waves of mana emanating from the stone and believes that this is some kind of signal that attracts monsters. Suddenly, hearing a noise nearby, Maeve and Ian were alarmed. Turning their gaze to the side, Ian said the phrase, "Remember the sun, here comes a ray," which Maeve, lowering her visor, found an interesting statement. Maeve and Jan saw a headless silhouette on a hill nearby on a horse. While Miguel's group was burying the grave, Philip turned around after hearing the words of Maeve and Ian. He saw a silhouette in a cloak and riding a horse. Philip asked in surprise who this headless man was, to which Ian replied that it was a puppet of a black magician. Jan asked if they hadn't heard rumors about a headless horseman who was wreaking havoc throughout the kingdom named Dullahan. Philip noticed in horror that he had recently met a werewolf, and now another monster. Looking at the monster, Philip said that Ian was right when he said that the kingdom was a mess. Looking at the discouraged Philip, Jan thought that when he said a mess, he didn't mean that high-level monsters would appear one after another. Ian remembered that the black magician valued the seeds he had sown, and therefore they would not need to waste time searching. Ian asks Philip to hand him his sword, which Philip obediently does by removing the blade from its sheath. Maeve, on horseback, calls out to Ian, who is preparing for battle, saying that she will be on the front line. Ian agrees, but suggests they watch him first, as Dullahan looks like he's expecting them to attack. Jan thinks that when provoked, the rider takes a defensive position with quite dangerous techniques, and if he is ignored, he attacks with rather simple attacks. Philip happily agrees with Ian's idea, but is interrupted by Miguel's loud cry that they are finished. Miguel, looking at Jan, Maeve and Philip staring at him, asks them what the problem is. Suddenly Dullahan raises his hand, uttering a phrase in an incomprehensible language, discouraging everyone present, causing Philip and Miguel to clutch their heads. Ian replied to Miguel that there had been no problems so far, but thanks to him they had just appeared. The horseman continues to use the ability, terrifying everyone except Ian and Maeve. The rider concentrates a huge stream of red magical energy in his hand, uttering incomprehensible words. Maeve asks if this is a spell, to which Ian replies that it is an ancient language. As Dullahan continues to speak, Ian believes that the rider is saying that he will not forgive the people who invaded the fairy lands. Philip asks how the hell Ian understands what he is saying, to which Ian replies that he somehow understands, remembering that he has the skill of an ancient language. Yang reflects that he upgraded this skill to complete tasks in the ancient civilization event, and that he is not interested in hearing that the rider is protecting the lands of the swamp fairies. Suddenly the rider utters a phrase that makes Ian wary, ordering everyone to immediately close their ears. Yang says that this is not just an ancient speech, but a spell, and if a person hears it, and does not resist, they will go crazy. Miguel shouts at his former comrades, calling them idiots and saying that they were ordered to cover their ears. From the grave behind the heroes, the resurrected dead began to rise, breaking through the loose soil. Those who were previously the headman's family, having emerged from the grave, changed beyond recognition, outwardly resembling ghouls. Philip and Miguel, still covering their ears, scream when they see the living dead, calling them ghouls. Ghouls have surrounded Miguel's former protégés, until they are blissfully unaware of what is happening. Miguel rushed to deal with the resurrected with a shovel, shouting that they were ungrateful bastards. Philip asks Jan and Maeve what they should do. Maeve replies that as planned, she will be on the front line and orders Philip to help the others. A terrified Philip tells Ian to kill him before the ghouls eat him. Ian asks Philip if he's really that worried about some ghouls, then says he wants to check something. Maeve said that she would finally see Jana's real skills and rushed towards the Headless Horseman. The Headless Horseman struck the ground with magical energy, creating a huge plume. The trail of dark magic almost overtakes Maeve, but having strengthened her blade with magic, she cuts the spell aimed at her. Heading straight towards the rider, Maeve inflicts a crushing blow on him, piercing right through Dullahan. Watching Maeve's blow penetrate Dullahan, Ian says that he thought that she was destined to become a knight. Ian said that even if he doesn't do anything, Maeve can handle it on her own while Philip fights off the ghouls with a wooden stick. Then he continues saying that he knows about Philip's abilities, and it wouldn't hurt for him to warm up a little. Meanwhile, Maeve continues the battle against the Headless Knight, catching herself thinking that the battle is difficult. Just as Maeve thought that the rider was hiding something, the Headless galloped right in front of her. Surprised, Maeve noticed that despite her blow, the rider regained his original appearance. Dullahan again began to cast the spell, uttering words in the ancient language and gathering energy above himself. Waves of dark magic instantly rushed towards Maeve, driven by the will of the rider. With difficulty, Maeve repels the rider's massive attack, cutting through the dark energy with her blade. Suddenly Maeve saw a sharp tip of a weapon flying towards her, emitting dark power. Having difficulty blocking the attack, Maeve noticed that the rider's weapon was a whip made of bones. Continuing his attack, the rider pulled his arm back, swinging the whip again. Masterfully wielding the whip, the rider sent the tip straight into Maeve's back. Maeve did not have time to avoid the blow from the rear, causing the rider's whip to entangle Maeve's hand. Having experienced sharp pain, Maeve saw that through the whip, dirty magical power was breaking through the divine mana. However, as soon as Maeve raised her hand, a blow was struck on the rider's whip, freeing the rider's hand. Looking back, Maeve saw that Ian had struck the whip with his spell, sitting on a horse next to her. Surprised by such a sudden appearance, Maeve calls Ian by name. Jan apologizes for being late at the rear, and saying that he has found out all the enemy's skills and can begin the real battle. Ian asks Maeve to hit the rider again with all her strength so that he flies out of the saddle. Maeve's gaze returned to the Dullahan, who was now focused on the sudden intruder. Her sword shone again, the divine power on the armor sharpened, and the strength spread throughout the body and the horse's breathing stabilized. The Dullahan who was pursuing Ian struck, destroying the ground in front of his horse. Having overtaken Ian, the rider said in an ancient language that he had caught him, approaching closer and closer. Maeve released her divine power and collided with the Dullahan, and from her blow he again shattered into pieces. Even though she pierced him once more, Maeve narrowed her eyes, another failure. This time it was as easy as before. But then the sound of Jan's hooves reached her ears as he rushed at the crippled Dullahan. His sword, imbued with magical power, flared up for a moment, and cut the creature in a sharp arc. Maeve watched as the Dullahan's silhouette disappeared like a mirage, leaving only small pieces cut off by Ian in the air. The rider's whip overtook Ian's horse, knocking him out of the saddle and killing the Artiodactyl. Immediately after this, Yang jumped from the saddle and, holding the sword with both hands above his head, swung it down. Maeve looked at the defeated rider, and was able to see something unexpected. It was the skull of a Dullahan, not quite human, judging by the large eye sockets. Maeve easily understood that this was his core, his true form. She didn't understand how Yang was able to detect him, but the important thing was that he was about to deal the final blow to him. The attempt to crush the skull was unsuccessful, because immediately after the impact the skull flared with energy. Maeve instinctively widened her eyes, her whole body froze. The rider's curse was so strong that even she, endowed with divine power, was enveloped in numbness. Maeve turned her gaze to Ian and, to her surprise, even the movement of Ian, who swung his sword, froze. The skull soared next to the frozen Ian. Maeve realized that the rider was going to return his true appearance. Before Maeve had time to think about the need to free herself from the stupor, Ian grabbed the skull with his hand. Feeling the hardness of the cheekbones of the skull in his hand, Yang smiled until the rider understood what was happening. Ian replied that monsters with names such as Indolph have at least one secret that helps to avoid a dangerous situation in battle. Continuing to grin, Ian told the rider that he knew his secret skills. Thanks to Ian's preparation and selection of appropriate resistance skills, torpor was only a slight slowdown for him. Despite the absence of eyes, Yang keenly felt the red light fluctuating in the eye sockets of the skull, saying that at such moments it was convenient to be an outsider. He lifted his lips slightly, as if smiling, and plopped the skull on the ground. Yang approached the skull with a blade at the ready and shrouded in magical power, noting that it was time for them to finish. The skull immediately rushed away from Ian, intent on avoiding his death and admitting defeat. But Yang immediately caught up with the flying skull and swung his blade, with significant displeasure on his face. Yang struck the skull with the blunt side of the blade, interrupting its flight and slamming it into the ground. Yang continued to pound the skull without any fancy moves or flashy techniques. Maeve silently watched the one-sided duel between Ian and the rider, not understanding why the numbness had lifted from her. Maeve didn't understand how a monster of such power could be defeated so easily. Yang continued to swing the sword with all his strength, regardless of which side it was, with the tip or the flat side, and repeated strikes. Under the pressure of Ian's blows, the rider's skull began to crack in the area of the frontal lobe. The panicking skull began to chatter rapidly in the ancient language as Yang pointed the tip of his blade directly at the cracked area. Raising the magic-enhanced blade over the skull, Yang uttered only the word. Finally, Yang's sword pierced the forehead of the skull, right between the eye sockets. Immediately, a blindingly bright red light flashed, as if the skull had exploded. The wind currents, together with the shock wave, swept everything in the area to the sides. Yang, who exhaled with relief, held the cracked blade in his hands, cracked from blows. Having crumbled from the blows of the blade, the skull lay lifeless on the ground, while Ian's sword was broken into fragments. Ian is unwell because another of his swords has broken, while Maeve just silently watches what is happening. The dark magician is indignant that Yang destroyed all the servants he encountered, starting with the leader of the kobolds and ending with Dullahan. In a rage, the magician throws his notebook at the wall, condemning Ian for appropriating the seeds he carefully nurtured. The magician calms down, saying that he will consider what happened as an opportunity to get rid of Ian, because soon the whole world will be in his power. The warlock continues his monologue by saying that the world will return to its true form and throw off its shackles, and he will be reborn as a higher being. And after rebirth, when the time comes, the first person the magician will absorb will be none other than Yang. Clear morning, the village surrounded by a wooden palisade is bathed in rays of sunlight. Two villagers discuss the death of the head of their village, mentioning that his only son was torn to pieces by wolves. One of the villagers asks the interlocutor if there is any news from the mercenaries that the gatherer is going to hunt wolves. Maeve is driving along the main street of the village. Miguel and Ian are walking next to her, to which the villagers ask what the noise is. The split skull of a headless horseman is tied to the saddle of the box. The villagers chatter, asking if the man who is completely covered in armor is a knight, and what kind of skull is tied to his saddle. One of the villagers recognizes Miguel, saying that he is one of those who went hunting wolves. The villagers shout at each other saying how brave Miguel looks, holding the head of the culprit in his hands, believing that it was he who killed him. Suddenly Miguel stops and tells the group behind him that they arrived even an hour earlier thanks to what a wonderful guide he is. The residents look in shock at Miguel, who was previously almost called a hero, while Miguel is nice to Ian, calling him master. Ian, looking at Miguel, thinks that despite his experiences, he has still become a good guide. Ian, Philip and Maeve sit by the fire while Miguel buries the bodies of his former colleagues. Philip tells Miguel to finish, to which he replies that he is doing this for his own good because his colleagues can turn into evil spirits and curse him. Under Philip's sympathetic gaze, Miguel continued saying that they put in a lot of effort until the very end. Philip asks Maeve what to do, because the journey takes much longer than they expected. Philip also notices that they are very late because they have lost their horses, while Ian only eats in silence. Philip continues saying that it will take at least another week to get to the burial forest, and if this continues they will not have time to search in other places. Hearing Philip's words, Miguel asked if the burial forest was their goal. Miguel then continued by saying that 5 days would be enough for them to get to the village. Miguel said that they could take a side road that only old mercenaries like him know about, to which Ian replied that then he would take responsibility. After Miguel agreed, Ian told him to lead them straight to the burial forest. Shocked, Miguel is indignant, not understanding whether he was really asked to lead them into the grave forest. Suddenly Ian throws Miguel a gold imperial coin, and all his doubts are instantly dispelled. Ian thinks that it must have been difficult for Miguel to refuse, because imperial gold costs twice as much as ordinary gold, especially considering that Ian accidentally complied with his request. Ian decides that it would be nice if Miguel replaced him as a witness to the Black Magician, because he himself is going to go with Maeve only to the grave forest. Miguel invites the group to gather in the tavern across the street when everyone has finished their business, while he himself goes to receive a reward for the task with the wolves. Jen gives Philip 3 coins, telling him to go to the stables and buy horses for him and himself. While Ian was lending money to Philip, Maeve asked him that he was going to go to the Luz Solar Temple. Maeve said that she wanted to go to pray, and offered to go together, which Ian resolutely refused. Yen excuses himself by saying that after the temple he planned to go to another place, and says that it is unclear what their companions could do if they were left alone. Approaching a small brick temple, Ian argues that knights value faith and honor. That is why they are an ideal target for priests, and by coming here with Maeve he would have lost his money. Yang opened the doors of the temple, flooded with light from the window. Except for him, there were no people in the temple. Looking at the statue, Yang understands that it is not light or mana flowing down the hands of the statue in the middle of the temple, and that this is a real miracle, which means that the temple was real. Then the energy from the statue's hands suddenly changes, falling closer to the floor and increasing its intensity right before Ian's eyes. An irritated man who resembled a priest entered the room and asked Ian who he was. He said that now is not the time for prayer, although anyone can come in, after which he looked in shock at the flow of energy emanating from the statue. The priest immediately began to praise Luz Solar, saying that none other than the apostle of the goddess had wandered into their region. Surprised Ian, not understanding what the apostles have to do with it, wonders what kind of nonsense the priest is talking about. The priest replies that the only time Luz Solar emitted a divine shine was quite a long time ago during the arrival of the apostle of the entire empire. Ian thinks that the priest misunderstood everything and believed in his own conviction, still feeling an inexplicable feeling. Ian apologizes, saying that he is not an apostle but a simple mercenary, which the priest is surprised at. Ian notices that he feels uncomfortable, as if he feels someone's gaze on him through the statue, and therefore he cannot pretend to be an apostle. The priest suddenly asked if Yang wanted to become an apostle and serve the sparkling goddess Luz Solar. Before he even had time to think about how ridiculous this sounded, a system panel appeared in front of Ian's face, inviting him to become an apostle of Luz Solar. Ian remembers that this quest was in the game, but he did not have enough level for it, after which the priest tells him to think it over carefully and make a decision without forgetting about him. Sincere Edward. Ian tells Edward that he will remember him and that he needs his help now, which makes the priest encouraged. Taking out the stones of dirty magic from subspace, Yang asks if it is possible to cleanse them with the help of the light of the goddess. The priest is frightened when he sees the stones and says that such a distortion of dark magic could not have been created by a simple monster. Ian insists on the question, saying that tomorrow he will leave the city by noon, and the priest agrees, saying that he cannot refuse him. The priest continues by saying that although there is more divine grace than usual, his physical abilities are only enough for 1 stone. However, the priest says that if Yang donates to the maintenance of the temple, the priest will pray all night long to cleanse the stones. Smirking, Ian says that Lu's solar service will require a lot of investment, after which he rejects the apostle's quest. Divine grace immediately dries up, shocking the elderly priest. The priest immediately admits his guilt, saying that it would be an honor for him to help someone who is under the protection of the goddess. Divine grace immediately illuminates the entire room with its radiance, returning in even greater quantities. The light of the goddess fell on Ian, casting a shadow on the priest, after which Ian told Edward to try harder, maybe then the goddess would appreciate his loyalty. Maeve, Philip and Miguel in the tavern, tipsy, call out to Ian, calling him a dragon hunter. An irritated Ian, standing in the doorway, dejectedly summed up that the others had already gathered. Ian asks what happened to the payment for the request about the wolves, to which Philip pours money on the table, saying that he added money there for the horses. An enthusiastic Philip asks Ian if he really hunted dragons. Ian looked irritably at Miguel, who, cowering in fear, said that he had not told so much, and that was because Philip was very interested. Ian answers Philip, saying that it was not a dragon, but a drake, and he only recently became an adult. Yang also noticed that this winged lizard could not even be compared with a dragon, thinking that he was forced to remember the disgusting times. With their mouths agape, both Philip and Miguel shouted and asked Jan if this meant that he had previously met real dragons. Dissatisfied, Ian, ignoring the question of Miguel and Philip, stabbed the meat on a fork, threatening to shorten their tongues. Without reacting to Ian's words, both Miguel and Philip continued, saying that according to rumors, the swamps are cursed and a person who steps there without being a descendant of ancient people will die. But Ian remembers that there is such an item in his characteristics window. Then he remembers the dark barrier, one of the biggest problems, the wall that divides the continent in half. Most of Aquilonia's problems are often attributed to madness caused by contact with the dark barrier. Suddenly hitting the mug on the table, Maeve shouts and orders the two to stop asking questions about Ian. She says that they got too loose when they got drunk, and sends them both to bed. As they left, Philip and Miguel began to quarrel, accusing each other of pestering Ian. Ian, sipping a drink from a mug and looking in the direction of Miguel and Philip leaving, thinks that there is not a moment of peace with them. Maeve turns to Ian, inviting him to go out and walk around the village for a while, saying that she needs to tell him something. Village at night, torches are lit on the houses along the streets. Fireflies are flying in the air. Ian walks next to Maeve holding a lamp. Maeve asks if everything is okay with him after receiving that thing during the victory of the Headless Horseman. Looking at the ring on his finger, Ian asks if she means the trophy he received from Dullahan. Jan crouched over the rider's split skull, complaining that he had broken his sword again. Suddenly, the dark energy remaining from the skull flew towards Ian, falling into his hand. Suddenly Ian was enveloped in a curse. The spirits of the swamp fairies attacked him, trying to strangle him. However, grinning, Jan only asked if this was the same madness, surprised at its low level. Jan said that this madness was nothing compared to what he felt when he found himself in this world as his outsider character, and instantly dispelled the curse. Smiling sadistically, Jan mentally asked if this was all the spirits were capable of, saying that he would crush them with his own mana. Suddenly Jan felt a surge of energy in himself, something he had only experienced when he first felt mana within himself. In his hand, Jan saw a small dark snake formed from the curse Jan compressed. Jan looked at the snake, saying that it was she who conveyed her feelings to him, and invited her to become his pet. The snake immediately entangled Ian's finger, forming a ring, turning out to be a trophy called Swamp Hatred, which allows one to curse the enemy for their life force, causing confusion. Ian remembers that the ring cannot be used at the beginning of the game if your will and intelligence are at a low level, after which he answered Maeve that as far as she could see, everything was fine with it. Maeve said that Ian had already surprised her several times, from how he simply dealt with the ghosts, to how he wore the curse ring without any problems. Maeve continued by saying that this is not surprising considering that he single-handedly overcame many obstacles in the cursed swamps. She continued by saying that she didn't know anything about it because she was in the border area, and that she was lucky to meet such a person as Yang. Smiling and blushing, Maeve said that she was sincerely glad to meet them. Ian looked at Maeve warily and decided to ask what she wanted to tell him. Going outside the village, Maeve said that she first learned about the existence of a black magician a few days after the order to protect state borders. When Maeve was about to set off, a messenger brought her a letter. It was a letter from Maeve's younger brother, Vernon Laurel. Maeve said that he is the head of the Laurel family and the shield of the royal family, which surprises Jan, because it is strange that the Apostle Tauren guards the borders while her younger brother is assigned to protect the king. Maeve replied that if she had stayed, her brother would not have achieved such status, after which Ian suggested that it was thanks to such a noble sacrifice that she attracted the attention of the goddess Tauren. Maeve continues by saying that Vernon understood this too, and therefore always tried to prove his worth. Maeve said that this is why he sent a letter in which he wrote that while the king was busy preparing for war, someone in the kingdom was cultivating the seeds of darkness. Ian asks to look at the letter, which makes Maeve surprised that he can read. Ian tells Maeve that her brother is very ambitious, saying that he will use the capture of the magician to be revived from the family. Reading the letter, Ian understands that Vernon wants to eradicate immorality and rule his own lands, making sure that he suffers from an inferiority complex and strives for recognition. Ian tells Maeve that the contents of the letter sound like her brother is trying to keep her under control so that she doesn't take his credit, which Maeve sadly agrees with. Maeve says that at first she didn't even have any thoughts about going in search of a dark magician, but a whole month has passed, and there has been no answer from her brother Vernon. Ian answered Maeve that a month is quite a long time, and if there was no answer from him for so long after he went after the dark magician, it can only mean one thing. Clenching her fists, Maeve replied that she understood what he meant, but this does not mean that something happened to Vernon, because he trained hard, overcoming himself. Maeve said that regardless of the situation, she must get to the bottom of the whole truth in the smallest detail. Ian realized that now he had learned a little more about how the divine apostle Maeve became a bloody avenger. That's why she burst into the castle, sweeping away everyone in her path and killing the king. This is who she whispered about, and who she tried to avenge by eventually turning into a ghost. Perhaps the game does not talk about the life and death of Vernon, and perhaps he killed the wrong enemies by making friends with the corruptors of Agellan, and therefore became an easy prey. Maeve says that she hopes that they will be able to catch the dark magician, because this is not the only reason for her story. She says that they are now in a situation where it is not clear who the enemy is and therefore she needs an assistant worth trusting. Maeve continues saying that it would be great if this place was taken by someone who has already fought with a dark magician and has excellent fighting skills. Yang thought that he was curious why she was telling a story about which he was not interested, but a window with a chain of quests appeared in front of him. Yang replied that he was a mercenary, and therefore would not take up the matter at the usual request, realizing that at least the rewards for the quest chain were attractive. Ian asked if he understood correctly that Maeve wanted to sign a new contract with different terms after the current request was completed. Maeve replies that everything is correct, and since the task is dangerous and serious, she can promise a decent pay, and if desired, the status of a nobleman. But now Ian is not interested in the reward. Yang said that before that he would like to familiarize himself with the contents of the agreement, especially about the cooperation part. Ian asked Maeve if she understood that she stood out very much in her shining armor, to which Maeve just shrugged her hands in confusion. Ian continued by saying that Maeve would have to go straight to the royal palace to prove the existence of a dark magician. Not to mention the loss of time. Once Maeve enters the castle, it will not be easy to leave due to preparations for war. Therefore, Ian suggested that Maeve split up, and while Maeve looked for the corruptors inside the castle, he would search outside. Looking at Maeve, Ian thinks that he is going to go alone, because the goals of the quest are corruptors and he can cope with them alone. As a bonus, outside the castle, Ian will not meet with the corruptors associated with Maeve, and she replies that she needs witnesses to prove the existence of the magician. Ian says that he is now not the only mercenary on the team, to which Maeve agrees, saying that there is also Miguel. Confused, Maeve says that she doesn't understand Ian, thinking that he would first want to talk about payment, because that's why she mentioned the status of a nobleman. Maeve says that in her opinion Ian could play a big role for the kingdom, but Ian refuses, saying that it would be better to get a lot of money. In fact, Yang thinks that he is indifferent to the fate of this world and he wants to see its end, as well as find the one who called him and get answers. And in order to achieve his goals, Ian needs to survive somehow. The heroes gathered at the gate. Maeve said that they were leaving from here, from the fortress in the valley, and following Miguel's instructions they went straight into the grave forest. The paper hand-drawn map shows the route of the heroes, which lies along the path to the grave forest. Maeve orders Miguel to start leading them, while Ian suddenly remembers all the noise they made yesterday. With a satisfied expression on his face, Yang holds 2 stones in his hand, artifacts cleared of black magic, hoping that he will soon be able to try them out in practice. Jan, Maeve and Philip follow Miguel along the path, reaching the outskirts of the Red Valley. A dissatisfied Philip, jumping off his horse, shouts at Miguel, saying that the road here is so terrible that it is impossible to pass on a horse. Scratching the back of his head and looking at the overgrown path, Miguel replies, he is sure that everything was different on the path before. Philip asks Miguel how long ago, to which he responds by wondering if it was 5 or 6 years ago, which makes Philip feel unwell. Indignantly, Miguel replies that it is not as dangerous here as before, because crowds of goblins and gremlins lived here. Dismounting, Ian asked if Miguel was telling the truth, to which he replied that this used to be their lair. He continued saying that they even eat grass and leaves, and therefore only bare branches remained on the trees. Catching the leaf in his hand, Ian sees that it is saturated with black magic, and says that what happened is that the goblins and gremlins could no longer feed on the local flora. Philip doesn't understand what Ian is talking about, and he reminds them that just recently they saw something that was moving while dead. Philip, shuddering, asks if Ian meant the family of the village head who turned into ghouls. When Philip asked if monsters could become ghouls, Ian replied that the forest was destroyed by dark magic and therefore anything could happen. Yang tells the group that in addition to the burial forest, there is also an infected forest, and from now on everyone should be careful. Ian also says to immediately report if anyone sees strange plants, and Miguel, pointing his finger, asked if he meant such plants. On a massive tree along the path hung strange-looking red fruits. Ian, noticing that the fruits were less ripe than he had seen, said that it would be better not to approach them. Miguel asked what would happen if they got closer, to which Ian replied that he could try it, given that the tree would definitely like it a lot of meat. Miguel shouted in horror that it was a carnivorous tree, after which Ian said not to approach the fruits and go faster. With a calm step and following the formation, the group moves along the path without disturbing the trees. Ian, holding the horse by the reins, says that everything will be fine if they continue to walk carefully. Suddenly the fruit on the tree begins to tremble. Jan, hearing a rustling on the tree, notices this. The fruit falls from the tree and pounces on the horse's head, immediately killing it before Ian manages to dodge. Ian's fellow travelers, shocked by what they saw, freeze in place, while Philip involuntarily screams. Ian, distorted in a grimace of rage, shouts that not even a day has passed since the purchase of the horse. The fruit that has bitten off the horse's head tries to quickly hide, taking the prey with it. Enraged, Ian rushed off to get the fruit, asking where he was going after killing his horse. Yang cuts off the root of the fruit, thereby avenging his horse and calming down. As the severed fruit falls to the ground, Ian lands, sheathing his sword. Everyone else looks at the open mouth of the fetus, inside which the horse's head still lies. Miguel asks, because Ian said that it is enough not to touch them, to which he replies that he thought so, but apparently they also react to sound. Ian continued by saying that so much the better, because he wouldn't have to listen to Miguel and Philip's chatter. Ian told Maeve that he would protect the rear and front with her, and asked her to hang the luggage on her horse since his was dead. Grabbing the luggage, Maeve's hand was pierced by a sudden pain, just like when her hand was wrapped in Dullahan's whip. Ian asked Maeve if everything was okay, to which he replied that everything was fine. Maeve asked Ian if he could find the root that polluted this forest. Ian is surprised by her question, especially since her brother is in a difficult situation. Ian thinks that he was going to find the root anyway, because he wanted to check this road since even its structure seemed suspicious to him. Miguel, shouting with anger, asks what they are talking about, because they hired him as a guide to the grave forest, and now they want to go deeper into the thicket. Maeve asks Miguel for forgiveness for such a drastic decision, and says that she will pay him good compensation, promising that he will not die here. Confused, Miguel agrees to move on, asking if they know how to find this route. Yang replied that he knew one way, after which he activated his magical vision. Yang also used the additional skill Sixth Sense, which increases the detection power of magical vision. Blade Yang followed deeper into the forest, telling the others to follow him. Instantly, dozens of open jaws of hungry cannibal fruits rained down on Yen from above. But Yang immediately cut each and every one of them, deftly wielding his sword, strengthening it with a windy blade. The group led by Ian continued its march through the forest. Ian still chopped down all the oncoming threats. Suddenly Ian stopped. Miguel behind him asked what the hell was waiting for them in front. Yang said that it was quite interesting, wondering if they came out to personally greet them. The corpses of goblins and kobolds revived by dark magic, overgrown with mushroom roots, emerged from the ground. Philip and Miguel are hysterical from what they saw and wonder what happened to their appearance. While Philip says that Ian mentioned that they could be ghouls. Taking a fighting stance, Yang confirms, saying that these creatures are very similar to ghouls. Maeve, taking out a blade and enveloping herself in divine energy, said that she would deal with them herself, swinging her sword. Ian tells Maeve that she should have used such a trick much earlier. The corpses of goblins and kobolds, overgrown with vegetation and driven by dark magic, rushed at the heroes. Suddenly Maeve, narrowing her eyes, screamed, ordering everyone to lie down on the ground. Miguel Yen threw himself on the floor while Philip grabbed the reins of the horses, leading them out of the line of fire. Maeve swung her blade, creating a magical wave that followed the blade and cut everything in its path. Sitting in a crouch, Yang thinks that, as expected, against creatures under the influence of dark magic, it is best to use divine power. Just thinking that he should deal with the remaining monsters, something caught Ian's attention. Looking at the staggering Maeve, he saw how the divine energy around her slowly dissipated. Suddenly Maeve, devastated by the force used, began coughing up blood. Philip hurried to Maeve, who fell helplessly to her knees and leaned on her sword. Dissatisfied, Ian noticed that naturally everything could not be so simple. Ian ordered Miguel to bring him all the butter and hold the horses, which Miguel promptly complied with. Having brought the oil, Miguel intended to ask if Ian was going to go into the forest alone, but Ian interrupted him by telling him to leave him the torch and look after the horses and Maeve along with Philip. Miguel, passing the torch, asked Ian, perplexed, what he intended to do. Yang, armed with a torch and throwing a bag of oil over his shoulder, replied that he would go into the very heart of the forest. Miguel asked if Ian was going to go into the heart of the forest alone, to which Ian asked him to stop asking the same thing. At this time, Philip tried to bring Maeve to her senses, but Miguel turned around not knowing what to do. Miguel answered Ian that he understood, and told him to be sure to return alive. Miguel and the horses rushed towards Philip and Maeve, while Ian headed deeper into the forest. Jan displeasedly remarks that he would be better off worrying about himself, and took out a bag from subspace. Saying that he hoped that these two could take care of Maeve, he poured the contents of the bag onto the torch, saying that he must first attract the attention of the monsters. The torch instantly flared up with great power, surprising Ian and slightly burning him. Armed with a blade and a torch, Ian decided that this would be quite enough. Miguel ran to Philip shouting for him to get ready, saying that now they are responsible for protecting the Lady of the Night. Goblins and kobolds, resurrected by dark magic, continued to crawl out of the ground, screaming and growling. Yang appeared behind one of the goblins, asking where he was going, after which Yang, with a deft vertical blow, cut the goblin into two halves. While Ian was beating one of the resurrected goblins with a torch, the others began to notice him, distracted from Maeve and the others. Suddenly Yang felt movement from the branches of the tree, at the moment when a carnivorous fruit was about to attack him. Yang activated his unique concentration skill, thanks to which he managed to dodge the fruit's attack without much difficulty. Yang, noticing that he was not even given experience points for killing goblins, freaked out, instantly cutting down all the goblins on the way. Pointing the torch towards the dark cloud, Ian said caustically that this must have upset him greatly. After this, Ian suggested that the observer turn his regret into anger, because he had only just begun. Rushing through the forest, Ian ran past the goblins, leaving behind only a fiery trail from the torch. Ignoring the goblins, Ian thought that letting weak mobs through was the rule of all players. Rushing through the forest, Ian came across a giant monster made entirely of wood. But his appearance did not impress Ian, which is why he simply jumped over him, pushing off from his head. Angry that Yang ignored him, the monster hit him, breaking the torch. The knockdown Yang sat down, saying that this monster was something like a mid-boss and that because of him he lost his torch. However, Ian immediately remembered that he has the ability of a sixth sense, and that he did not need a torch. Having found the source, Yang went to the boss of the polluted forest, a twisted ancient tree. Ian is surprised that the tree is so big, because in the game it was much more polluted than at the moment. Without paying much attention to this, Yang decided to stick to the plan, finally deciding to use the purified artifact. One of the fruits on the tree tried to strike Ian, but he managed to dodge. Surrounded by a large number of huge toothy fruits, he began to dodge, trying to get to the tree itself. Continuing to dodge, Yang stuck his hand into subspace, thinking that he could rush into battle, but that it was pointless. Taking out a bag of oil, Ian doused all the fruits in his path, waving the bag in all directions. Throwing out a couple of bags of oil, Yang shot after them with a fire spell, setting them on fire. Lost in thought, Ian stood in front of a tree, surrounded by burning patches of earth. As he originally intended, his actions led to the fire engulfing the entire tree. Looking melancholy at the burning tree, Ian thinks that if he had studied strategies while playing this game, he would not have wasted his skills on useless grey magic. Reflecting on the fact that Yang is still using useless magic, he suddenly notices another weak point. Jumping off the ground, Ian is indignant at why the hell this boss's weak point was placed so high. Suddenly, in the middle of a jump, a tree attacks Ian, throwing him back with streams of steam. Taking out the cleaned artifact, Ian grins, saying that he expected everything when the boss uses his steam technique. Ian describes the steam technique that would uses to extinguish a fire in a crisis. Immediately after which he uses a powerful long-range attack during which he uses all his heads. The most important thing is that this period takes time, which means Yang can use magical skills. Yang uses the low red magic spell Flamethrower, although thinking that it is for close ranges, but deciding to strengthen it with an artifact. However, Ian notices that the artifact continues to intensify, which makes him decide that something is wrong. The artifact was draining Ian's magic more and more, something he didn't remember doing in the game. Having absorbed enough mana, the stone concentrated Yang's spell, turning it into a destructive fiery explosion. Yan had difficulty holding back the fire spell, which the artifact intensified to incredible power. When the spell dissipated, only a charred trunk remained in the place of the boss tree. While the burnt armor was crumbling, covering his eyes, Ian realized that this was not the power of the artifact. It simply absorbed his magic and strengthened it. Ian is surprised that the mechanism of the artifact is so different from what was in the game. Ian recalls that in the game he was fully equipped with artifacts and magical weapons. I think that maybe they were all controlled by magical stones. Looking at the tarnished stone, Yang sadly says that the concentration of power has become lower, but he was going to use it more than 50 times. Nothing remained of the twisted ancient tree except a large supply of charcoal. Taking the blade out of subspace, Yang says that he feels sorry for the poor guy, and says that he can rest. Holding a torch in his hands, Miguel looks at the clouds of smoke in the distance, wondering what Ian did with all this oil. Remembering the pillar of fire that recently broke out, he is sure that it was the work of Ian. Hearing the rustling, Miguel turned around in fear, deciding that there were still ghouls left. However, Miguel saw Ian coming out of the bushes, and was incredibly happy about him. Miguel asks Ian if he is okay, saying that he does not look very good, to which Ian simply asks for a rag to wipe off the dirt. Wiping his face with a rag, Ian thought that he had never imagined that it would be such a tough thing. Immediately after Yang struck the weak point of the tree with his sword, pieces of falling coals created an explosive chain. Ian told Miguel to stay here and figure it out if something happened, while he himself went to Philip and Maeve. Philip and Maeve are sitting by the fire. Maeve leans her back on her sword while Philip watches her closely. Philip calls out to Ian, happy to see him back. Ian asks Maeve if she's okay. Breathing heavily, the confused Maeve says that this happened to her for the first time, because she does not have any illnesses. Philip believes that she was poisoned, but Ian says that since she is an apostle, this is not a simple dark spell or curse that weakened divine protection. Taking up the sword, Philip told Maeve to provide his treatment to him, to which Ian objected by asking what he would do. Hearing that Philip was going to cut Maeve's wound to remove the infected blood, Ian was slightly taken aback. Ian, feeling Spanish shame, tells Philip to stop unless he wants to kill her. Ian sees something causing discomfort in Maeve's left hand, believing it to be contaminated magic. Ian ordered Philip to remove the armor from Maeve's left arm, which Philip successfully completed. Under the armor, Maeve's hand was wrapped in a rag and oozed dark magic. Philip was shocked by what he saw, calling out to Lou Solar, but Ian confirmed the guess that the cause was the injury received from Dullahan. Ian finds what is happening strange, because no matter how strong Dullahan's curse was, it could not overcome the divine power. Remembering the divine power, Yang, without much enthusiasm but out of necessity, prays to Lu Solar. But then his attempt is interrupted by a voice in his head, saying that he can absorb the curse. Feeling that this was swamp hatred, Yan began to think, because in the description of the ring there is no information about absorption. On the other hand, the ring is Dullahan, so there is nothing surprising in absorption. Apparently the ring doesn't want Ian to turn to God, and Ian is very glad that he is not the only one who hates gods. Ian tells Philip to hold his hand tightly, saying that he is going to heal Maeve. Taking off his glove, the snake on his finger begins to move, shocking Philip. Ian tells him that it is his pet. An indignant Philip says that Maeve needs to stay away from corrupt people and monsters, otherwise the goddess will get angry. An angry Ian asks Philip if he thinks he's a spoiled person, to which he awkwardly replies that he doesn't. Ian then tells Philip to shut up and hold Maeve's hand, otherwise he will do everything bad that comes to his mind to him. The snake slid from Ian's hand and grabbed Maeve's hand, beginning to absorb the curse. Philip, delighted that the curse has disappeared, calls out to Maeve, saying that they succeeded. Philip, with tears in his eyes, says that this monster really managed to heal her, after which Jan says that she is in no danger. Suddenly the snake snarls and hisses at Philip, who is stretching his hand towards it. Frightened, Philip pulls his hand back, asking Ian what's wrong with him, to which Ian responds with ignorance. With a terrifying look, Ian tells the snake to crawl back, causing the latter to submit to the order. Philip asks if it's normal to wear a monster on your finger like this, to which Ian replies that even though he tamed it, the nature of the snake has not gone away. Jan again asks Philip to shut up and bring him a dagger, bandages and alcohol, while Jan himself uses the first aid skill. Next to the fire was a barrel of alcohol, a dagger and bloody bandages. To the joyful exclamations of Philip, Maeve came to her senses after treatment from Ian. Maeve, looking at her bandaged hand, says that she is again receiving help from Ian, although it was her idea to find the root of the pollution. Sitting down on one knee, Ian replied that he had already solved the problem at the root, to the shock of Maeve and Philip. Maeve, annoyed that Ian again did everything alone, replied that the artifact had taken possession of her. When asked if the magician was trying to desecrate her, Maeve refused, saying that he only said that it was brazen to use red magic, and that this man would soon pay. Maeve says that he had a specific magician in mind, and that it might help if you understand who he is talking about. When Maeve asked if Ian had any guesses, he answered who knows, thinking that the magician had spotted him after all. Waving a shovel, Miguel says that they are wasting time, and that the black magician is much more important. Ian tells him that digging is his unique ability, and if he wants to dig a hole faster, he can use the power of the winter. Philip says that the large tree was completely burned, and is glad that the fire did not spread further. Maeve replies that this used to be a forest of fairies, and they practically do not burn, and that is why many fortresses were built where fairies lived. Maeve also says that Ian probably knew about this when he started the fire, which Philip picks up. At the tree, Jan is happy to notice that the seed of the ancient tree, which gives an additional skill point, has not burned. Yen thinks that he can take the advice of the information window and eat it, but this is a bait because there is a hidden quest, and therefore he simply hides it in subspace. Suddenly, Ian heard screams of an incomprehensible nature from below that this was madness. Having gone downstairs, Ian, along with Maeve and Philip, came to Miguel, asking what was the matter. Miguel says what's crazy is that corpses were found under the roots of the tree. Ian replies that it looks like a sacrifice, which Miguel is taken aback by. Maeve asks if this means that the dark magician sacrificed people to raise this monster. Hearing the words about sacrificing people, Maeve's eyes widened and her gaze went blank. She immediately remembered her conversation with Ian in the village about how her brother had not written for a month. Having come to the realization of the possible outcome of her own brother's campaign, Maeve fell into a stupor, beginning to deny even such a thought. Maeve became enraged. A dark aura enveloped her from head to toe as Ian watched her. With a grunt of dissatisfaction, Ian realized that most likely he would have to sort out even more problems. A group of heroes looks in surprise into the hole dug by Miguel. Philip does not believe his eyes. Buried under the roots of the monster's now burnt tree are many human bodies of varying degrees of decomposition. Philip says that they were all killed for sacrifice and suggests that quite a few were sacrificed. Continuing his thoughts, Philip believes that it is possible that Maeve's brother Vernon, with whom contact was lost. Suddenly Philip falls silent, looking at Maeve and realizing that it was reckless to say something like that. Maeve silently looked at the bodies of the victims, completely immersed in her thoughts. Images of her brother from days gone by appear in her thoughts. But Maeve does not believe in his inglorious death, saying that it is better if he died bravely fighting the darkness rather than as a sacrificial beast. But then Maeve wonders what if this is really the case and Vernon was trapped in the darkness before he could use his skills. Angry Maeve, clenching her fists, thinks that if this happened, then she will risk everything she has to take revenge. Suddenly Ian interrupts Maeve's thoughts, saying that the longer he looks at this picture, the more convinced he is that this does not look like the methods of a black magician. Philip asks Ian if the magician arranged the sacrifice, to which Ian replies that the method is somewhat different. Jan says that the black magician uses contaminated magical power, and has not previously been noticed making sacrifices. Ian continues by saying that the bodies look more like prisoners who were supposed to be transported by the regular army of the city of Orendel, taking out shackles from the pit, handcuffs with a pattern in the shape of deer antlers, as well as a sign on which is written Dave, a regular army soldier. Philip agrees, saying that these are the kingdom's handcuffs and also the identification cards of members of the regular army. Yang tells the others to think about why someone who operated in such remote places would risk attacking the army. Philip happily agrees, saying that Ian's words make sense. Maeve thinks about what it means that Vernon is not among the victims, but she also realizes how pathetic she is for being captivated by an event that she wasn't even sure about. Ian tells Maeve that apparently the goal of the next contract after defeating the magician is determined, talking about Orendel. He continues by saying that even if it is not connected with a dark magician, it could be the work of an immoral person, and therefore he will go to Orendel and personally find out everything. Maeve has no choice but to nod and agree with Ian, saying that he can go. Philip asks Maeve in surprise if they really signed another contract, to which Maeve notes that it was necessary. Jan tells Philip to bring the horse since the lady has given her consent, and says that if this horse is dead, then he will ride on it. Philip replied that now was not the time for jokes, but did not hear anything in response, and realizing that Ian was not joking, he rushed to look for the horse. Ian turned to Maeve, who had drowned in her own thoughts, asking Mrs. Lors to pray for the dead. Not expecting such words from Ian, Maeve was taken aback, but Ian replied that in his opinion it would be better if the gods put their souls to rest. Maeve, very encouraged by this request, noted that this was a great idea, saying that she would do it. Maeve immediately knelt before the mass grave, praying to the gods to rest the souls of the sacrificial lambs. Jan wonders whether he should be happy that she took on this, because until recently she, by all indications, was deprived of divine power. Ian thinks that if this happened once, it will most likely happen again, but he notes that divine power, although temporarily, will be able to restrain the madness. Maeve prays to the sparkling goddess, asking her to take care of those who suffered on this earth and bless their souls so that they can find peace. Maeve thought that although there is no evidence that Vernon is dead, she is still very worried, wondering what Vernon is doing now. Suddenly her brother appears in front of Maeve, saying that he will surpass her and prove that he is worthy to lead the whole family. Confused Maeve, who did not expect to see her brother, tells him that he has already done enough to prove himself. Vernon asked Maeve if this was so, to which Maeve confidently replied that he did not need to be so zealous. Vernon told Maeve that she knew nothing at all, which surprised and confused Maeve. Vernon turned around, blood flowing from his eyes and mouth and flowing onto his neck, and he continued by saying that Maeve did not know that he was already dead. Instantly Maeve returned back, disheartened by what she had just witnessed. Maeve grabbed the visor of her helmet, not understanding what happened and believing that what happened was a crazy dream. With an unfocused look, Maeve looked around, seeing that she was lying on a cart behind the reins of which Ian was sitting while both Miguel and Philip walked nearby. Ian calls out to the confused Maeve, asking whether she can be considered as having already woken up. Maeve asks Ian how long she slept, and wondering where the cart came from which Ian realizes that Maeve does not remember anything. Ian replies that they found an abandoned cart along the way and Ian decided to use it. Maeve only agrees, thinking that she cannot remember anything due to the fact that she is absorbed in personal experiences, but Ian says that she woke up just in time. Ian replied that they would soon arrive at the burial forest, which left Maeve in a little shock. Looking back at Miguel, Maeve asks why they didn't warn her in advance, to which Miguel only looked away in confusion. Ian says that it was he who asked them not to talk, because if Maeve had known about this earlier, she would not have been able to rest so well. Ian replied that if Maeve had nothing to object to, then she should continue her rest, to which Maeve agreed, answering that she would give in to him this time. Miguel continued to exchange glances between Ian and Maeve, which is why Ian caught himself thinking that he was going to tear out his eyes. Suddenly the cart stopped. Miguel asked why Ian stopped the cart, to which he replied that it was the horses that refused to go further. Maeve tells Ian that the sinister magical power is similar to the one contained in the contaminated artifact right in front of them. Jan agrees, saying that these lands, shrouded in ominous fog, are the border with the lands of evil. Philip asks if Ian means that these lands are cursed by calling them lands of evil. Jan confirms his words, saying that these lands are cursed and corrupted under the influence of the Dark Wall, and even the laws of nature are different here, so anything could mutate. Ian remembered that they say that you no longer come out of this forest wondering if you really will be able to get out of it. Maeve gets off the wagon, saying that she will not go further, and tells Miguel and Philip to take everything they need. Miguel panics slightly after saying that they are not returning from the forest, but Ian convinces him that the curse will be lifted after killing the magician, probably. Miguel replies that essentially his job was to lead them to the burial forest, to which Ian asks if Miguel is asking to kill him. Miguel replies that he wanted to say that this is a great opportunity for him to prove his loyalty in such a dangerous situation. Philip says that even though he was ready for this, he is still very nervous, to which Miguel replies that he, too, will eventually have to go there. Ian asks his partners if they are all ready. Maeve answers her about her unconditional readiness. Maeve continues, saying that she will not back down no matter what happens in the grave forest. Suddenly Ian feels an evil gaze on himself, realizing that the black magician has discovered him. However, Ian believes that this does not really matter because the magician was not ready to meet the guests, which makes Ian happy to see his stupid face. He continues his thought, saying that it's time for him to pay for tormenting him by sending his monsters, and besides, he needs a reward and skill points. The group moves through the burial forest, surrounded by dead trees and shrouded in fog. Philip asks Ian if they are definitely on the right path, to which Ian says that they are, and that Philip is tired of asking about it. Philip, gritting his teeth, thinks that he shouldn't have asked Ian, remembering how the three of them sat by the fire. Jan told Philip that if he was afraid to go into the forest, then let him say so, to which Philip shouted that he would lead them through the grave forest. Philip didn't think that Ian would actually allow him to lead the group through the forest, but for the sake of the lady he would give it his all. Seeing that Philip has pulled himself together, and is really trying, Ian understands that he is not completely hopeless after all. Jan looks around the area feeling some strange feeling, not understanding what is happening here because polluted mana cannot flow endlessly. Suddenly the group passed through a dense curtain of fog, as if approaching the heart of the forest. Philip joyfully exclaims that he didn't think that they would really succeed. Miguel tells him that he didn't believe in him either, saying that he can directly hear the fear coming out of him. Ian tells Philip and Miguel that they are rejoicing early, because all the fun is just beginning, looking at the mausoleum in the middle of the forest. Approaching the entrance to the crypt, the heroes talk about how their journey is not over yet. Ian takes a step forward and says what will happen next, causing Philip to feel relieved. Miguel, on the other hand, does not feel any relief from the fact that they intend to go down to the crypt right now. Ian replies that the decision had to be made even before they set foot on the lands of the grave forest. Now there is only one way left. The heroes, lighting their path with torches, descend deep into the crypt along a huge spiral staircase. Before entering the room, Philip, holding a torch in his hand, asks Ian if they have arrived. The group of heroes entered a large, dark room covered in mustiness and dotted with ruined statues. Philip is surprised that such a huge space can be underground, indignant at how dark it is here. Maeve stops Ian, saying that she should say a prayer before they move on. She says that from the moment they entered her stigmata has been weakening, to which Ian asks what stigmata is. Maeve replies that stigmata is a mark that is placed on your soul the moment you become an apostle. She replies that thanks to him, Maeve can communicate with God and receive his power, which for Ian sounds like a slave contract. Ian recalls the moments when he almost pledged his soul to the gods, thinking that in this world one could get a knife in the back even from the gods. Ian agrees, telling Maeve that if necessary, she can pray right now. Maeve takes out her blade, stabbing it into the ground, and permeating the floor with divine energy. Divine energy enveloped Maeve as she knelt in prayer while the others watched in silence. Miguel tells the others that the place is surprisingly empty, looking around into the darkness. The uncomprehending Philip asks what he meant. Miguel replied that this place is called the burial forest and hundreds of bodies are buried here. But he continues to say that on their way they have not yet encountered any remains. Yang interrupts his reasoning. Peering into the darkness with magical vision, Ian says that they need to see it with their own eyes, saying that the magician was preparing for their meeting. Miguel and Philip confusedly ask Ian what he means, but they hear a noise behind them. Suddenly the entrance to the room slammed shut so quickly that Philip and Miguel did not have time to run up to them. Philip touched the stone slab that closed the passage with his hand, and immediately the walls of the room were covered with dark writings. Yang said that this was a spell that caused everything in the tomb to come into action. In the darkness one can see many glowing violet eyes, but Yang repeated that, as he said, "Now everything will begin." An immeasurable horde of skeletons moved towards the heroes from the darkness, led by the will of the dark magician. The skeletons were already approaching the group while Maeve continued her prayer, and Ian simply waited. Taking out the mace from subspace, Yang snorted, saying that the magician could also hang up an advertising banner with the inscription, "I am a necromancer." Philip, with his eyes wide open, asked Ian where he got the mace, while Miguel asked if he was hallucinating. The skeletons growled menacingly, rushing towards the heroes. Ian was ready to meet them while Maeve was still praying. Suddenly, Ian jumped straight into the crowd of skeletons, shouting that Philip and Miguel were protecting Maeve, to which Miguel again became indignant about Ian's desire to fight alone. Yang rushed through the hall, belching from the fragments of statues along the way and continuing to move forward. Yang approached the crowd of skeletons with a mace at his advantage. Most of them did not even pay attention to him. With a blow from above, Yang smashed the skeleton with his mace, crushing his skull into small fragments. As the skeletons began to surround Ian, he used the low-grade magic of a rotating barricade, pushing the skeletons away from him. Throwing back his opponents, Yang strengthened the head of his mace with a rotating barricade spell. Wielding a mace enhanced by a spell, Yang broke through the ranks of skeletons, demolishing everyone in his path. Yang, satisfied with the result of the experiment with the mace and the wind spell, compared the mace's effectiveness with the hammer. Yang felt the magician's gaze on him, directed at him through the skeleton. Yang realized that the magician was watching them, hiding like a rat. Looking at Maeve over his shoulder, Ian decided that it was not time yet and that the battle was still entirely up to him. Yang thought that the more opponents there are, the higher the chance that one of them will die, and therefore decided to slightly reduce the numbers. Swinging his mace, Yang turned to the magician, telling him to watch better as he crushed the skulls of his servants, while he himself cowardly hid. Yang's provocation worked, and the dark magician immediately jumped up from his throne, emitting dark energy. The skeletons rushed at Yen even more furiously, until the walls of the tomb shone brighter than before. Throwing the mace over his shoulder, Ian thanked the magician for getting angry, saying that now they will see who can hold out longer. All that reaches Philip and Miguel is the dust from the battle. Philip asks Miguel if they shouldn't help, to which Miguel replies that Ian told them to guard Maeve. Suddenly Maeve opened her eyes, having finished her prayer, and ordered Philip and Miguel to get out of the way. Yang continues to swing at the evil spirits with his mace, knocking back skeletons and ghouls. Suddenly Maeve rushes towards Ian, shining with divine energy, and calling out to Ian. Ian replies to Maeve, who is rushing towards him, that she is rather late. Ian stepped aside, allowing Maeve to fly next to him at great speed, while Ian only held his chin. Taking the sword by the blade, Maeve used the hilt to hit the skeletons, strengthening her attack with divine energy. The ghouls and skeletons that stood in the way of Maeve's blow fell into pieces, flying in all directions. Maeve continued to deliver a series of swings, sweeping the skeletons out of the way like dust. Smirking, Ian thinks that every time he sees something like this he feels insignificant. And yet, deciding that it is impossible to just stand and watch, Ian strikes a blow to the head of the ghoul who approached Maeve from behind. With a face full of surprise, Maeve looked at Ian, and after exchanging glances, both continued the fight. With their mace and blade, Jan and Maeve swept away and crushed all opponents who dared to approach them. Philip, watching the battle, only watched what was happening with his mouth open, whispering in admiration. Miguel shouted at Philip, telling him not to stand rooted to the spot and to quickly follow him. Philip and Miguel ran over the bones of the skeletons that Maeve and Ian had defeated, trying to keep up with them. Noticing that Maeve began to run out of steam, Ian noticed that low endurance was one of her weaknesses. But it was strange that she got tired so quickly. Yang does not think that her divine power has weakened, believing that most likely her connection with the stigmata has weakened. Miguel and Philip, not seeing enemies in front of them, suddenly believe that everything is already clear in front. Suddenly, Yang feels a sharp surge of magical energy, noticing that magical power is flowing through the chains of spells. Suddenly the walls of the crypt begin to sparkle with magical energy many times brighter, shocking Philip and Miguel. The bones under Philip's feet, the remains of crushed skeletons, begin to move under the influence of magic. Philip turns around seeing movement next to him, wondering what is wrong with this skeleton, while Miguel opened his mouth in shock. The remnants of the defeated ghouls and skeletal beings began to gather into one point, shining with contaminated mana. In the place where the bones and bodies came together, they formed a huge mass of mucus, bones and flesh, which Yang called the Death Drag. Ian is surprised by his appearance, because he appeared later in the game, suggesting that there were simply enough corpses here. Philip announced that the drag was approaching, while Miguel, feeling the wall, said that the gate was closed, and it would be impossible to escape. To Miguel's surprise, the stone slab suddenly began to move, opening a passage. However, behind the door, directly in front of Miguel, stood a horde of armed and armored skeletons. Jan notes with a grin that this squad should have been in a deeper place, thinking that the magician was well prepared. A group of heroes found themselves trapped, surrounded by a drag of death on one side and a horde of skeletons on the other. Maeve tells Ian that apparently they will have to fight an army of monsters, to which Ian tells her not to try to kill everyone, but just to stop while he clears the way. Maeve and Jan separated, rushing in different directions under the amazed glances of Philip and Miguel. While Ian uses his mace to sweep away the skeletons, opening the way deeper, Maeve holds back the advancing drug. Each skull killed by Ian was immediately absorbed by the death drag, strengthening it. Ian notes that the mechanics of the drag are exactly the same as in the game, and every killed skull is absorbed by it. Ian tells Maeve, who is striking the drug, that there is no such thing as infinite magical power. Continuing to smash the undead, Ian says that although there have been some changes, so far everything is going according to his plan. Suddenly, Ian notices a ghost floating in the air, wondering what he is doing here. A lake ghost appeared before him, living near lakes and possessing men by absorbing their energy, and luring women into the lake, possessing their bodies. Ian says that they were supposed to meet later, and wonders if the ghost is also subordinated to the dark magician. The lake ghost strengthened the skeletons, and they rushed at Ian with noticeably greater speed. Scattering skeletons one after another, Ian made his way to the ghost, intending to eliminate him. Yang swung his mace, but the ghost avoided the blow by dodging and ending up behind Yang. Dodging the attack, the ghost aimed at Philip and Miguel, who were in the rearguard. The ghost removed his hands from his sparkling eyes and began to scream heartrendingly. At this moment, Yang felt that the ghost was using the death throws skill, causing damage and inflicting confusion. Ian realized that if he didn't stop this now, both Miguel and Philip would die. Ian loudly shouted for Miguel and Philip to cover their ears as one of his eyes lit up with fire. Jan immediately created many fireballs around himself, intending to burn the ghost to the ground. Seeing the magic of fire, all members of the group were noticeably surprised. Miguel and Philip covered their ears with their palms. Jan attacked the ghost by shooting at him with the fireballs that he had managed to conjure. The fireballs fried the ghost to a crisp. He only managed to emit a heart-rending death rattle before he became ash. Several more fireballs flying over Maeve hit the drug directly, blowing it up from the inside. Philip and Miguel, standing by the toasted drug, turned around, staring at Ian. Philip cannot believe what he just saw, but Miguel, seeing the fire magic, was scattered in assumptions. The couple was brought out of their thoughts by a shout ordering them to gather, because the battle was not over yet. The group was still surrounded by undead on both sides. There were only slightly fewer skeletons. The drug was still alive. Ian says that he wanted to hold back this trump card, but now that he has used it he feels great. Yan again created many fireballs and said that now that he has nothing to hide, he can fight without any hesitation. A series of fiery explosions destroy all the undead in Ian's path, scattering debris from the bodies of skeletons and ghouls. Maeve and Philip run to Ian, looking at the fiery explosions. Maeve realizes that everything is falling into place. She recalls past situations, saying that she did not expect this since Ian does not look like a magician at all. She compares his intelligence and education with his secrecy and discretion, and understands that Ian was the red magician whom the warlock was looking for. Another lake spirit hovers over Philip and Miguel. Maeve rushes headlong towards them. Thinking that she was once again in Jan's debt, Maeve cuts off the hand of the lake ghost. Maeve shouts to Ian that she has dealt with the ghost, landing on one knee. Ian shouts to Maeve not to lose sight of him, because there will be a fork ahead. Maeve thinks that Ian is speaking as if he has been here before. Suddenly Maeve is taken aback, noticing a headless corpse in a cape and knight's armor lying on the floor. Seeing the armor, Maeve recognizes it as the armor of the royal knights. Images of her brother appear before her eyes. With fear, she raises her hand to the cape. Picking up the nameplate from the knight's body, she sees that the name Charles Carter is written on it. Laughing awkwardly, Maeve was glad that the body found did not belong to Vernon. Suddenly, the contaminated magical power of the artifact under Maeve's armor intensifies. Maeve feels that the energy is intensifying, but at the same time that it does not belong to the dark magician but to someone else, and she feels that something is calling her on the left side of the fork. Lost in her thoughts, Maeve does not notice that Ian calls out to her 3 times, saying that she was careful. Droog was already hovering over the confused Maeve, who dropped the sword from her hands. Maeve barely manages to raise her sword and strike at the Droog, dodging its attack. Philip and Miguel run to Maeve asking if everything is okay with her. Miguel asks if she got hurt again. Ian, rolling his eyes out of anger, shouts at them to stop fussing around and immediately come to him. Before he can tell them to run to him faster, a stone slab appears in front of Ian. Confused, Philip and Miguel stopped holding Maeve's arm before they could reach Ian. The stone slab slammed loudly in front of their faces, blocking the path to Yang. An irritated Ian on the other side of the wall wonders what Maeve could have seen to behave this way, after which he says that, as he thought, they were separated at a fork. Ian, resigned to the current state of affairs, says that there is nothing left to do but move forward. Turning to the horde of skeletons and armored ghouls approaching him, Ian says that all he can do is kill the dark magician. Separated by a wall, Philip asks Maeve what they should do while Miguel hurls insults at the wall. Behind the heroes, the inexorable Dreug was constantly advancing, and Philip notified the others that the enemies were close. Turning to the only remaining passage, Maeve collects her thoughts and thinks about the need to get Philip and Miguel out. Rising and holding her sword, Maeve tells Philip and Miguel to follow her while she clears the way. Maeve accelerated and rushed into the passage. Philip, who could not keep up with her, invites her to go along, while Miguel asks not to leave him alone. Maeve destroys the skeletons on her way, clearing the way for retreat from the Droog. Philip asks the hurrying Maeve why she sped up so much, offering her his help. Entering the room, the trio freezes. Maeve takes a breath while Philip and Miguel look around the room in surprise. In the room the heroes were waiting for many skeletal warriors, who did not attack them, but allowed them to pass. Philip asks in surprise why the skeletons don't attack them but just stand there. Suddenly a voice echoes throughout the room, ordering the skeletons to make way, to which they instantly obey. The owner of the mysterious voice turned out to be a man clad in armor who resembled a knight, who said that they had come to the address. The knight greets Maeve, calling her Apostle Taurel, saying that he can simply call her sister Maeve. Confused, Miguel incomprehensibly asks who it is, while Philip recognizes the knight's voice. Shocked Maeve, not believing what is happening, asks the knight if he is Vernon Laurel. Before Maeve had time to ask why Vernon was here, he immediately lowered his visor and rushed at Maeve, who had difficulty blocking his blow. Maeve, shocked by her brother's actions, asks him why he pointed his sword at her. Laughing madly, Vernon replies that now his time has finally come to surpass Maeve. Having thrown her away with a blow, Vernon again raised his blade over Maeve's head, answering that he was strong enough to kill Maeve. At this time, Ian fights off a horde of skeletons trying to get to the dark magician. Irritated, Ian says that the skeleton can take the mace if he likes it so much, after which he throws the mace and quickly runs on, ignoring the enemies. Seeing a statue of a knight in the middle of the room, Ian enthusiastically remembers that this knight is part of the puzzle. At great speed, Yang jumped straight towards the statue, covering the distance in a split second. Yang landed right on the pommel of the sword of the knight statue, causing it to sag downwards. Hitting the floor, the knight's stone blade opened a passage below into the crypt, bringing Ian closer to the black magician. Yang goes downstairs, saying that in general this is a short exit that is used after killing a dark magician. Ian thinks that even though he knows about the exit, what's the point of leaving if he only killed the mid-boss while the battle between Maeve and Vernon continued? The skeletal hordes overtook Ian again, pinning him at the secret exit. Smirking, Ian tells the skeletons that he doesn't mind if they get out of here. Jumping off the walls of the passage, Ian went down the secret passage, going deeper and deeper. Flying next to a huge temple, Ian thinks that even King Agellan doesn't know about this place, because before it was a temple in which fairies prayed to the god of death. Entering the temple, Ian appeared before a dark magician sitting on his bone throne and holding a staff in his hand. The necromancer admits that Yang has gone far, but tells him that this is his territory, which he created with trepidation. The necromancer continues his monologue, telling Ian how he will enjoy reprisals against him, because he has enormous power thanks to this cursed land. Interrupting the necromancer's protracted monologue, Yang hits him with a destructive fire spell. Holding in his hand the artifact with which Ian strengthened his spell, he tells the necromancer that he does not learn from his mistakes at all, since he decided to chat after already dealing with Ian. But this spell was not enough to kill the magician, and with screams, the dark magician began to move, emitting dark energy. After Yan's spell hit him, the dark magician grew 2 more arms, while his staff emitted dark energy. A perplexed Ian says that the magician's transformation looks even worse than in the game, and tells the necromancer that he talks too much while he has not yet taken his final form. After which Yang, again strengthening the spell with the artifact, told the magician to approach if he was not afraid. The dark magician, raising his staff, activated the spell to summon minions, calling on the ancient fairies to answer his call. Dark energy shone around the magician, and the hall was immediately filled with hundreds of screaming skeletons. The dark magician says that in addition to gray and red magic, Ian also brought artifacts with him, but now, having lost them, he does not pose a threat. With shouts that the magician will show Ian how insignificant he is, the warlock sets fairy spirits against Ian. Skeletons surrounding Ian rush towards him, while Ian stands still without moving. The laughing necromancer says that Ian froze with fear, when suddenly he soared into the air. The confused magician does not understand how Yang could instantly rise into the air, aiming his staff at him. Concentrating mana in the artifact, Yang says that it is difficult to hit with this skill, but this does not matter since there are enemies everywhere. The entire ceiling of the room was instantly covered with a huge number of fireballs. Yang used a skill called Dancing Flames. The skeletons, opening their jaws, only stood and looked up, sanctified by the flames of the fire. A rain of fireballs immediately covered the entire space of the room, destroying all the summoned minions of the magician. The dark magician shouted in rage that Ian's spell was just childish tricks, and began to cast the spell himself while Ian was already approaching him. Swinging his staff, the magician created a ghostly wall, shouting that Yang would not be able to avoid it while in the air. Ignoring the magician's words about the inevitability of his wall, Yang created a fireball in his hand. Throwing a fireball under him, Yang was able to dodge the warlock's ghostly wall with the help of a shock wave. Taking out the previously discarded mace from subspace, Yang enveloped himself in gray magic, hanging right in the air. Yang rushed towards the warlock and caught him by surprise. Trying to protect himself from the blow of Yan's mace, shrouded in a wind spell, the black magician covered his face with his hands. With one swing of his mace, Yang tore off a pair of the warlock's arms, flying past at residual speed. The black magician screamed in pain, having lost 2 arms from Ian's blow, his face contorted in agony. Yang landed on the ground, his mace smoking after the strike, and Yang noted with dissatisfaction that he had missed. Yang stands on the pedestal of the temple. The floor is strewn with fragments of skeletons, and in front of him, on his knees, lies a dark magician who has lost 2 arms. Twisting the mace in his hand, Ian says that as he thought, using this thing is not easy, and that he should continue to study various combinations in battle. Yang continued, saying that he wouldn't have had to study them if he weren't an outsider. The panicking dark magician said that Yang deceived him in order to weaken his vigilance because he had more than one artifact of gray magic. Ian says that the magician is right, which is actually a lie, and says that he has prepared something special for him, which is also a lie. The magician's staff shone again, emitting dark energy, and the magician said that he recognized Yang's power and therefore would fight at full strength. The magician pointed his staff and energy flowed throughout the room, and even beyond. The remains of skeletons from all over the room were drawn straight to the warlock's staff. Yang, without much enthusiasm, notices that the dark magician is moving into the second phase and will become a little faster. The black magician in his second phase appeared before Yan in the form of a huge undead warlock. Yang answered the magician that now his weakness in physical defense is absolutely unimportant, because his new form is very predictable. The dark magician exclaimed that he received this power from the void, and that he would make Ian realize that death is a blessing, attacking him with a powerful beam of dark energy. Having difficulty dodging the beam pursuing him, Ian notices that it is damn fast. Intoxicated by Ian's running, the magician exclaims to him to run and hide like a rat. Ian understands that the magician is enjoying the process. Ian notices that the same tactics work here as in the game, and now he needs to get around him to reduce the interval. Yang continues to dodge with the thought that the magician will not be able to hold this technique forever, and waits for a window to strike. Noticing that the magician's technique was weakening, Yang immediately rushed on the offensive using the dancing flame skill. Yang attacked with dancing flames down to the feet of the dark magician, which the latter certainly did not expect. Mocking that Yang directed his attack downward, the mage used his dark beam technique again. However, the magician misses because Yang runs under the beam approaching him. The artifact broke, becoming the last enhancement for Yang's dancing flame spell. Yang rushed between the magician's legs, going around him from behind, which the dark magician certainly did not expect. Trying to turn into a black magician, he only noticed, discouraged, that he could not move. The magician finally understands that Ian was aiming at the legs specifically to tie them up. Yang notes that due to how quickly the magician realized this, he had enough time to prepare a medium-level magic technique enhanced by the artifact. Electricity shoots out of Ian's hand and he tells the magician that it's too late to rush about. The magician asks Ian if he is going to use gray magic by strengthening it with an artifact. Ian tells the magician that now it no longer matters. Yang uses a medium gray magic spell called Lightning Chain, and the electricity immediately entangles the dark magician. The black magician, incinerated by electricity, froze, still sparkling and beginning to crumble into dust. The mage's body began to crumble and crumble, sprinkling ashes all around while Ian was still standing nearby. From the decayed shell, the black magician remained lying in the dust in his original form. Ian, covered from head to toe in ash, tries to shake it off, saying how disgusting it is. The defeated dark magician asks how it is possible that he can use magic of different colors. Blaming the sword, Yang replied that he was already dead in 3 minutes, and therefore did not understand why he needed this information. In despair, the magician says that he would have defeated Ian if he had more time, the truth of the beginning of time, or the power of the abyss. Swinging his blade, Ian replies that to the magician, even if he had more time, he would not have known the truth and would not have learned the secret of immortality, calling him by name Conrad. Turning around, the magician says that this cannot be, and asks how Ian knew his name. Without answering anything, Yang cut off his head with a deft blow to the necromancer suffering in agony. Hiding the blade in its sheath, Yang asked why there were so many questions, because he wouldn't understand anything even if you told him everything. Yang grabbed his head, saying that he had overdone the use of magical power, and almost suffered exhaustion. Yang thought that he needed to take the loot. He could keep the magician's staff and use his head as evidence of his murder. Suddenly, dark energy began to emerge from the magician's head, forming the magician's distorted soul. Surprised, Ian is shocked that the boss has 3 phases, saying that this never happened in the game. The spirit of the magician with screams attacks Ian, taken by surprise, holding his staff in his hand. Suddenly, behind the ghost, spaces begin to crack, forming cracks saturated with energy. The space cracks, revealing a huge hole, pulling the soul of the dark magician inside itself. Having completely absorbed the magician's soul, the rift in space closed, leaving no trace behind. Yang wonders if this was the same emptiness that the dark magician was talking about. Yang also recalls that the sectarians from the game said the words emptiness, chaos of the beginning of time and the abyss. Shrugging his shoulders, Ian says that he wanted to go into the abyss anyway, so that's where he went. Looking around, Ian notices that the spell on the tomb continues to work, coming to the conclusion that the murder of the magician still did not cancel it. Behind the altar on which Yang defeated the magician, a small passage leading inside was discovered. Yang reached the place where the chains of all spells converge, in the middle of which a certain sphere hangs on the altar. Noticing the magician's diary lying nearby, Ian notices that he really kept the diary like a madman, but decides to familiarize himself with the contents in search of important information. From the entries in his diary, Yang learned that the floating sphere on the pedestal is a source of energy. It is also a dark entity of impressive size. Yang notes that its power is different from contaminated artifacts and is more comparable to divine power, after which he says that it would be a pity to destroy the sphere, deciding to trust his internal resistance. Deciding to try to absorb some magical power, Yang touched the sphere with his hand. However, the sphere began to forcefully pull Ian's hand inside itself, making a strange noise. The sphere suddenly burst into a bright, blinding light, illuminating the entire room and blinding Ian. Once inside the sphere, Yang's consciousness floated through space, flying past many planets. Not understanding what was happening, Yang agreed that the view was quite beautiful and then approached the black hole. The black hole began to pull Ian inside itself, but the attraction suddenly stopped abruptly. Looking around, Ian saw a cosmic glow that illuminated everything around him while he was at the very epicenter. Having difficulty getting out of the sphere, Yang fell with force, hitting the brick floor of the tomb. Shrouded in the energy of the sphere, Ian vomited after such an incredible space journey. Yang began to panically shout out the command to open the status window, wiping his mouth after vomiting. Yang began to frantically click on the character panel, increasing the mental strength stat. Covered in sweat and wiping his saliva, Yang said that it was dangerous, and he almost went crazy. Not understanding what the hell was going on, Ian noticed that he had spent 9 skill points, saying that in any case he had already developed other necessary skills. Yang saw a quest panel suddenly appear, which indicated that the task had been completed, which Yang was surprised at because he had not even received the quest, let alone completed it. The quest says that Yen managed to return the fragments torn from the chaos of the beginning of time to the abyss, and the reward was a fragment of chaos. Yang believes that then this means that the black hole was this very abyss. Continuing his reasoning, Ian believes that the look that he felt on himself belonged to the creature, and this creature was nothing other than an ancient deity, and given what he saw, Yang could only think in this direction. Thinking about the reward he had received, Yang felt a familiar sensation in his chest, the same as from the sphere of the energy source. Suddenly, Yang wondered if this was the same force of chaos that the magician had mentioned. While Ian was thinking about the power of chaos, the battle between Maeve and Vernon continued on the tiers above. Feeling the familiar wave of confrontation between divine power and polluted magic, Yang became wary. Ian wondered if the collision of divine energy with polluted energy meant that Maeve was injured. The court servants discussed that this time Maeve was chosen as the apostle, not at all surprised by this, and saying that she is amazing. Vernon is standing by the mannequins. The maids are discussing that Maeve can become the head of the family, because compared to her, Vernon is not so interesting. Maeve comes out from around the corner, saying she's glad to see that he's training hard and offers him sparring. Vernon, smiling, only answered Maeve that she was not ready yet. Maeve and Vernon cross blades, parrying each other's blows expertly. Vernon throws a punch at Maeve's head, knocking her helmet off her head. Philip and Miguel shout that Maeve barely manages to take the blow, and ask if she has used up all her divine power. Laughing, Vernon continues the attack, asking Maeve what happened and why she can only defend. Suddenly Vernon freezes at the moment, when Ian pierced the dark magician with a lightning spell. Maeve silently looked at her brother, calling out his name in a questioning tone. Vernon, with a surprised look, says that he feels that his master's energy has disappeared. Philip asks if she has a black magician under her master, to which Miguel replies that it was probably Jan who killed the necromancer. Maeve lowers her sword, saying that if the dark magician is dead, then they no longer need to fight any further. Maeve asks Vernon to return home, saying that even though his body has changed, there is probably a way to fix everything. Vernon replied that now that the one who was holding him back was dead, he was completely free, and the first thing he plans to do when he gets out is to burn the hated kingdom to the ground. Immediately after this, Vernon will take the lives of all living things and become stronger. Then he will become the sole and all-powerful ruler of his own territory, just like the demons behind the Black Barrier. He continued by saying that all this will begin after he kills his sister. Vernon rushed at Maeve, who was only looking at her brother with a blank look. Suddenly, the dungeon's spell chains sparkled, emitting a bright light and becoming unstable. Vernon immediately jumped away from Maeve, slightly shaking in surprise. Philip and Miguel watched in shock at what was happening with the spell chains. Suddenly Philip called out to Maeve, saying that her divine power flared up with renewed vigor. Drops of sweat flowed down Maeve's face. She said that divine power was overwhelming her. Vernon laughed, saying that the goddess was probably angry that her beloved apostle first broke off contact with her, and then resumed. He continued, taking the sword in both hands, and said that then they would fight with full force. Maeve, who did not raise her sword, tried to stop her brother, saying that all this was pointless. But Vernon did not listen to his sister, and continued his blind attack. Shouting out her brother's name, Maeve raised her blade with tears, realizing that Vernon could no longer be convinced. Vernon jumped on Maeve, striking from above, and Maeve raised her blade to pierce her opponent. Maeve, with a blank look, was doused with blood immediately after the collision between brother and sister. The blade pierced right through the armor, coming out from behind, crumbling the breastplate and spraying blood. Philip and Miguel shout out to Maeve in horror, saying that this cannot happen. The blade stopped slightly scratching Maeve's shoulder. Her sword pierced Vernon right through. Philip joyfully proclaimed Maeve's victory. Dropping the blade, Vernon coughed up blood, groaning from the pain and the wound. Maeve realizes that at the very end Vernon could not point his blade at her. Vernon tells Maeve that his feelings prevented him from delivering the final blow. Standing with his sister's blade in his chest, Vernon said that as he thought, he remained a weakling until the very end. He continued by saying that he hated her for the way she smiled at him without even realizing that she had everything and he had nothing. But in fact, he did not hate his own sister, continuing to train tirelessly. In fact, Vernon just wanted Maeve to recognize him as her equal. Vernon continued, saying that in the end he still couldn't surpass his sister. Maeve calls out to her brother in panic, saying his name, as his consciousness begins to fade. With tears in his eyes, Vernon tells his sister that he is still happy about this outcome. After all, he always wanted to fight on equal terms with his sister. Holding her dead brother in her arms, Maeve continued to call him by name, not believing what had happened. Philip silently looks at his mistress. Miguel asks Maeve to calm down. Tears flow down Maeve's face, and with a mournful cry, divine energy bursts out of Maeve. A whirlwind of divine energy enveloped Maeve and Vernon, lifting them into the air, which Miguel and Philip could only watch. Ian rushes through the dungeon, saying that he was so distracted by the power of chaos that he did not notice that the spell had been lifted. He says that the only reason for everything that happened could only be the mid-boss Death Knight. Having turned into the street, Ian recognizes the boss knight in this room as the boss of the night, slowing down with difficulty on the stone floor. Ian froze when he saw a column of divine energy lifting Maeve into the air, holding the body of a Death Knight in her hands. Philip and Miguel stand near the pillar of light. Philip says how sorry he is for his mistress. Ian runs up to the guys and asks what happened here, to which Miguel only manages to mumble something incomprehensible. Maeve sank to the ground, still holding the body of the defeated Death Knight in her arms. Maeve tells Ian that he returned, thanking him for all his help, because without him she would not have been able to get so far. But she continued, saying that they would not be able to continue their journey together, which Ian did not understand at first. Maeve replies that Vernon is dead and that he was here all along, saying that he was already killed and resurrected in order to manipulate him as a puppet. Ian, shocked by this news, thought that he could not even imagine that the Death Knight was Maeve's brother. Maeve says that she prayed to the goddess to save her brother's soul, but of course she did not answer, because she blames the soul for its sins and does not save. However, Maeve then says that if she wants to take revenge for her brother, the goddess will answer her. Ian asks Maeve, speaking of revenge, she means that she will kill everyone who was involved in this. Maeve, turning around and looking at Ian with eyes burning with fire, replied that this is the revenge that she wants to bear. Hearing Maeve's phrase, Ian fell silent for a second, Understanding where the bloody avenger had come from, Ian grabbed the blade, apologizing to Maeve and saying that he would not allow her revenge to take place. Maeve, taken aback by Ian's words, asked with dissatisfaction in her eyes what he meant. Ian responds by reminding Maeve that there is a contract between them, and that she apparently forgot about it. Jan asks if Maeve forgot that she asked him to find out the full picture of what happened with that huge tree, to which Maeve asks to cancel this contract. Ian replied to Maeve that until now he had never cancelled a contract at the request of the customer. Moreover, he never left the customer alive who unilaterally tore up or did not pay for the contract. Ian says that Maeve will have to fight him. It's not that difficult, and if she intends to kill a lot of people, she'll just add him to this list. But Ian continues with a piercing look, saying that otherwise, the Lady Knight will die. Maeve gets up from her knees, retreating from her brother's body and clearly dissatisfied with the words she heard from Ian. Philip tries to calm Maeve, but Miguel immediately covers his mouth with his hand, saying that he does not understand the current situation. Maeve, with a look full of hatred, asks Ian if he was really going to kill her. Maeve and Ian exchange piercing glances as the tension between them continues to rise. Maeve exhales powerlessly, saying that today she has already lost one person dear to her. Calming down, with tears in her eyes, Maeve says that she doesn't want to lose another one. Ian asks if this means that Maeve will not cancel the contract, to which she agrees, saying that their agreement continues. But Maeve also says that she will still take her revenge, to which Ian replies that he does not intend to interfere with her, but does not know whether she will be able to succeed. Maeve asks what he means, that her path is unrighteous or that she cannot cope alone. Ian agrees with both theses. Maeve asks Ian, who is sheathing his sword, what will happen if he helps her take revenge. Ian replies that then the story of her revenge will be completely different, but they will talk about it when they get out of here. Philip and Maeve carry out Vernon's body, placing it in a cart that is driven directly to the crypt. Miguel tells Ian that he is amazing, which confuses Ian, and he asks what Miguel means. Miguel tells him not to pretend that he didn't know that Maeve wouldn't kill him even though she wasn't herself. Ian tells Miguel that he didn't know, which shocks Miguel, and then adds that once you start making exceptions, there will be no end to them. Ian thinks that he did not want to kill her. His plans were to force her to obey even if he had to tear off her hand, although in this state she would go crazy and die, which Ian did not want. Ian finds it surprising that Maeve even grabbed the sword. It is obvious that madness was raging inside her, and it was not easy to suppress it. As a result, Ian was never able to prevent Maeve from becoming an apostle bringing vengeance. Approaching Jan and Miguel, Philip asked if they really had no boundaries at all. Miguel told Philip that he didn't understand anything and shoved a skewer of meat into his mouth. Ian asked Maeve if she mourned her brother. She said yes, adding that it was only thanks to him. All four are sitting by the fire, pondering what happened to them inside these cursed lands. Ian asks Maeve if she is okay, saying that now she has become an apostle bringing vengeance, and a lot has changed in her. Jan noticed that the red divine energy was different from the previous one, which confirmed that she had become an apostle bringing vengeance. Maeve replied that now the goddess will grant her strength, only to carry out revenge. Now Maeve's powers are extremely limited, but when it comes to carrying out revenge, he will gain even greater power. The main restriction that you will lose your power after suffering injustice disappeared as soon as Maeve became an apostle of revenge, which allows you to do anything for the sake of revenge. Maeve replied that she did not regret her choice, but all her life she would regret that she could not kill the black magician with her own hands, saying that, driven by personal feelings, she missed revenge. Suddenly Ian threw a bag the size of a soccer ball at Maeve's feet. Jan said that this was the head of the magician, and that she could take it with her. Having opened the bag, Maeve saw the head of the magician. Ian continued saying that the battle with him was the most ordinary. Philip coughed theatrically and asked if he had killed the magician with magic. Ian caught himself wondering why he didn't ask, answering that it looked like that. Miguel, rubbing the bridge of his nose with his fingers, tells Philip that he is giving him advice because he is worried about him, saying that he has no ingenuity, asking if he even thinks before asking. Miguel continues his monologue by saying that he hid his magic so that they would not know about it, but since there was no other choice, he used it to save them, and therefore they should just pretend that they didn't see anything. Philip apologized to Ian for the questions, then thanked him for saving him. He continued by saying that he would take Ian's secrets to the grave, but Ian, with a wink, replied that this was great. Maeve tells Ian that she owes him additional compensation for killing the dark magician and asks what he wants. Ian thinks that at first he wanted to keep all the loot for himself, but in the end he made concessions, saying that he wanted something worthy. Hearing Ian's demand, Maeve thought for a moment, selecting the required board. With a sudden movement, she removes her sword from her belt, handing it to Ian as compensation. Philip is indignant when he tells Maeve that this is her sword made of imperial steel, to which Maeve says that is why it is a worthy reward. Noticeably surprised, Yang, thinking that he certainly did not expect to receive her sword, says that he will handle it well. Taking the sword in his hands, an information panel appeared in front of Yang, in which a description of the blade was written. Ian recalls that in the game the blade was a simple trophy, but now it has not been desecrated and therefore has no restrictions other than recovery time. Maeve tells Ian that although this sword is not so famous, it has been with her for quite a long time and therefore will be useful to Ian. Taking out a blade shining with blue light from its sheath, Ian answered Maeve that the blade was amazing. Ian thought that the balance of the blade was good. It was heavier than it looked and therefore he could swing it as easily as Maeve. But if he couldn't handle it, he could always invest a couple of skill points in strength. Maeve tells Ian that from now on he will temporarily replace her, and hopes that he can get to the bottom of the truth about what happened to the village in Orendel. Maeve also asks Ian to make sure he comes back alive. Smiling, Yang replies that the only thing she has to worry about is herself. Ian tells Maeve that if he wants to take revenge, she needs to be extremely careful, that she must hide her feelings, and she cannot kill anyone until he returns. Maeve just nodded silently, but Ian continued by saying that she should stay alive, because someone should pay him for the information that he finds out. Maeve agrees with Ian, saying that she vows not to make a fuss until Ian returns. Miguel asked Maeve and Ian if they had finished discussing all the important matters. Miguel pulled his hand into his bag, saying that they had all suffered recently. Taking a small keg out of his bag, Miguel, with the face of the happiest man, asked how about a drink. Philip is shocked by the fact of the presence of alcohol. Ian wonders how the keg survived in the dungeon, while Maeve replies that today you can drink. Miguel says that's a great idea, saying that after everything they've been through, they can't leave without drinking. Ian, just like Maeve, agrees with the idea that on such a day you can have a drink. While Jan and Maeve calmly drink drinks, Miguel colorfully tells something to the hanging-eared Philip. The moonlit night illuminates the crowns of the trees, and a burning fire can be seen in the middle of the forest. Ian, illuminated by the light of the fire, holds a mug in his hands next to his face, lost in thought. Yang thought about it, saying that he could clearly see what was happening in the dark forest in the middle of the night without even resorting to magical vision. Sitting on a log, Ian wonders if a fragment of chaos caused this. Behind him, 2 corpses lie by the fire. Behind Yen, a man is kneeling with a bloody eye. Grunting and coughing, he asked Yen how this is possible. A man with a scar on one eye and blood on the other eye asked how Ian could drink poison alcohol and remain okay, because an elephant would die from such an amount of poison. Smiling and hitting the bottom of the mug on a log, Ian asked the man if he wanted to know how this was possible. Approaching the man, Yang thought that he had put a lot of effort into the immunity skill in order to survive in the 4th chapter. The wounded man took the blade out of its sheath with a trembling voice, shouting to Yang not to approach. Ian pulled out the sword Maeve had given him and effortlessly blocked his one-eyed opponent's attack. The bandit was horrified to see that from the blow of Yan's blade, his sword was covered with cracks at the point where the blades touched. Yan's blow broke off the bandit's blade, breaking it in 2 and throwing the bandit back. The bandit begging Ian to listen to him, while he tightened his grip on the hilt of the broken sword in his hand. Yan pierced the man's hand, preventing even the slightest attempt to resist him. Yan was indignant at the bandit's move, saying that if he plans to kill someone, he should be ready to die himself, to which the bandit only howled in panic. The bandit said that this poison should have made Jan fall unconscious so that it would be easier to rob him, but Jan took the mug standing on the log in his hand. Jan spun the blade stuck into the bandit's hand, causing him to scream in pain. Ian poured the poisoned contents of the mug directly into the screaming bandit's mouth, causing him bewilderment. Clearing his throat, the bandit realized in horror that Ian had given him their own poison alcohol to drink. Demonstratively showing that he had poured out the entire contents of the mug, Ian said that if the bandit told him the truth, then he would leave him alive. The bandit shouted, calling Yang a bastard, while Yang quickly ran through his vessels and the veins on his face turned black. Immediately the bandit vomited, sprinkling the ground next to him in a pool of blood. Having sheathed the blade, Yang said that if the bandit had told him the truth, he would have died painlessly. Yang turned around hearing tense sighs mixed with screams behind him. The sound came from Philip, who, with a noticeably tense and frightened face, pierced one of the bandits with a sword while covering himself with a shield. Looking at Philip's frightened face, Yang said that even his face began to look more courageous. Sighing wearily, Philip asked Ian why he didn't help him after defeating the rest of the enemies. Ian replied that, as he had already told him, what was happening was different from their usual walks. After leaving the grave forest, the group of heroes split into two parts. Maeve, taking Miguel, went to the royal palace to report on the battle in the grave forest. In addition, Maeve ordered Philip to hit the road with Ian. Not expecting such a request, Philip asked why suddenly, to which Maeve replied that even though it was just a request, she did not want to send such a valuable witness as Ian alone. Maeve said that Philip would help Ian and witness what he would have to go through, to which Philip objected by saying that he was her squire. Maeve replied that they had Miguel, asking if he would be her squire, to which Miguel happily agreed. Ian wondered if Maeve did this on purpose, because she needed another witness, and decided that Philip would be suitable as his assistant. Ian thought that since Philip had made many mistakes, he could pay off his debt by telling Maeve that he understood what she wanted. Ian continued by saying that her request would be dangerous for Philip, because he could die, asking if he would be okay, smiling maliciously. Not paying attention to the extremely frightened Philip, Maeve answered Ian that he was a very worthy warrior and squire, not to mention his determination. Maeve put her hand on Philip's shoulder, saying that on a journey with Ian he could learn a lot, after which she said to serve Ian faithfully and gain experience. Ian had no choice but to sigh languidly and agree with his mistress's words. Ian told a tensely breathing Philip that as long as he was with him, Philip should be able to make at least some contribution to their common cause. Ian thought that Philip was much more talented than he seemed, and then reminded him that it was he who asked Ian to join the group around the fire because night had fallen on the forest. Inhaling exhaustedly, Philip thought that in this situation he had nothing to say because it was true. Philip wonders, telling Ian that perhaps he wanted Philip to have a similar experience of seeing the kingdom without embellishment, to which Ian asks why Philip gives this situation any meaning. Jan threw a bandage into Philip's hands, telling him to give himself first aid and finally get up from his knees. Philip asked Ian if there was anything left, to which Ian said that they had to do the most important thing. Pointing his finger at the bodies by the fire, Ian continued saying that the most important thing is to sort through the things of the dead. An indignant Philip asked if Ian meant that they needed to pick their pockets, to which Ian replied that in fact it was just a transfer of ownership, adding that he had probably seen this often in the border area. Continuing to be indignant, Philip said that then it was the return of stolen goods, but now they are simply going to take other people's things for personal use. After Philip shouted that stealing from the dead was completely unacceptable, Ian hit Philip on the head, and Philip froze, illuminated by a bright light. The source of the bright light illuminating Philip's face was a wallet filled to the brim with coins. Philip immediately rushed to rob the corpses, which he had previously found unacceptable, but Ian thought that Philip was too excited since he imagined himself to be a knight. Ian looked in surprise at Philip, who was sparkling with pride from having received a new belt, gloves, sword and shoes from the corpses. Jan and Philip approached an ornate chest encrusted with precious stones. Jan thought that the chest was sealed too well for the skills of his now-deceased guards. Before trying to poison Ian, they said that they were transporting cargo for Lu Saad. Philip interrupted Ian's thoughts by asking if he just wanted to open it. Believing that perhaps Ian missed this quest in the game, and that it would be better to open the chest during the day, Ian knelt down next to him. Taking the chain of the chest with his hand, Jan tried to drag it into subspace, but it seemed to push the chain away. Philip looked questioningly at Ian, while Ian thought about the fact that he was experiencing a strange feeling next to the chest. Taking the dagger out of its sheath, Ian told Philip to move away, which he immediately did. Filling the blade with mana, Jan struck the chest many times, trying to split the largest stone that replaced the lock. After the lock on the chest broke, the chest slowly opened on its own. There was a whiff of magical energy from the chest, and something quickly rushed towards Yen, who only looked in amazement. Philip called out to Ian in fear, watching helplessly how quickly everything happened. The mysterious figure attacked Ian, pushing him by the shoulders with his hands, knocking him down. The creature hit Ian hard on the ground, not giving him a chance to react. Having come to his senses immediately after the blow, Ian concentrated to take a closer look at what attacked him. To his surprise, Ian discovered that the creature that attacked him had long pointed ears, white hair and bright red eyes. Ian looked in shock at the person frozen above him, realizing that what appeared before him was none other than an elf.